Hello, friends. So here we are. This is the first full episode of the Cross Pollination podcast. Very excited to try it out. This is still a little bit rough around the edges in terms of sound, for example. But I hope you'll stick with us and have a nice time. A little note before I present my guest, or rather, a little couple of notes, because when you hear this sound, this is the sound of an audio footnote. So it means that I added some content at the end of the talk and that there are some further explanations about whatever we were talking about when you heard that sound. Okay, so now about Chris. Mr. Walker is a friend of mine and a very interesting person in general. He is the singer and rhythm guitar player of the band Substereo, and he's also the main composer and founder. He worked for the UN, and he used to be an officer in the Danish Royal Army. This guy is a jack of all trades. He's also a competent music producer, writer. He's a painter. He makes stop-motion movies. He's a handyman, and he builds all kinds of stuff, including motorcycles. I'll give you a link to his channel down there. And he also lived in close to a dozen countries, and we'll talk about that. And he's a polyglot. He speaks at least 4 different languages fluently, but he speaks more than that. He has a background in sociology, a very interesting family history, etc. There is a lot more ground to cover there than we managed to get into in one conversation, but we'll talk about a lot of stuff still, and I hope it will be interesting for you. The interview in general is more of a conversation. That's what I'm trying to do with that podcast. And as a consequence, it evolves gradually and naturally. But I tried to break it down in different subjects so I can give you some kind of a summary. The first part of the podcast tends to be more centered around Chris's time in the military, and we get into the way his military experience feeds into his music making. His upbringing as a TCK, meaning third culture kid. His life, and my life, we talk about living in multicultural cities like Berlin or Paris. Then we talk about his enrolment in the Royal Danish Army and some details about that. Then we talk about when he was deployed in Iraq and the peacekeeping operations he took part of there. His role in the UN in Ethiopia and Erythrea. And then we get into the political side of things, his opinion about it all, and his disillusionment with the UN and the military, and different reflections about dealing with death, with violence, and the value of life. In part 2, we talk about music much more, and we cover his band, Substereo, the process that led him to be a full-time musician and to become an artist, thoughts about integrity and the creative process, music as a form of communication and parallels and we talk about parallels with linguistics, so with language, reflections on the nature of creativity, the question and answering the question, the $1 million question, which is, how do you know that you have written a good song? The difference between a good idea and a viral one. The finality of art and the existential crisis of the artist and creative people in general. The relevance of music in the age of information. The tyranny of measurement. And being an artist in a modern Western society. So there is quite a lot we get into, and towards the end, we start to go really meta and get philosophical. But I hope it will be as interesting to listen to as it was for us to have the discussion. And here it is, Mr. Chris Angel Walker. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like Oprah.
You kind of look like Oprah.
Yeah, I do. Already we're starting. So thanks for helping me, giving this a shot. This is a crash test, and
we'll see how it goes. So the entire idea of trying out this podcast thing is to have different ideas collide and hopefully give birth to something new and interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wanted to have you on because I think you're a very interesting person. And you have quite a unique history and you've done a lot of different things. And maybe for people that don't know you that well, we should start with that.
Sure.
The history. Because I think, it's an important thing it's an important part of who you are as an artist and etc.
Yeah.
And then, I'd be interested in having your thoughts about what it's like to be a creative musician in the 21st century here in Berlin, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, as far as my background goes, I have different backgrounds, which most people would probably say are very counterintuitive. I have my musical background, the creative background, and then I have a military background, which off the bat seem like two very different things, but in reality, they really complement each other, I think.
Yeah.
And so basically, I come from a musical family. My mother was a concert pianist, and my father was also very creative, although he worked for the United Nations. So we were traveling all throughout my childhood. My dad is Danish. My mom is Mexican. I grew up in the United States. I was born in Austria. And I've lived in Mexico and Sweden and Denmark.
You lived in Sweden?
I lived in Sweden for a while, yeah.
For how long?
I think a total of about 3 years, 2 or 3 years. I was working in Denmark.
Where in Sweden?
Malmö.
Oh, Malmö.
Yeah, it's just over the bridge.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, going over from Copenhagen to
Exactly.
Malmö.
Yeah. So that made it really easy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of people work in Denmark because the pay is better in Denmark and the apartments are cheaper in Sweden.
Oh yeah, a lot of people do that in France too, between France and Switzerland, or between Spain and France, and etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, border people.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was a border person for a while, and I lived in the UK also. I studied sociology in London at London Metropolitan University.
You got a degree, or you?
No, just at the first year.
You did 1 year.
And then I got deployed to Iraq.
Oh, okay.
I was going to continue.
So you were a sergeant at that time, or no?
No, I was an officer.
You were an officer?
Yeah, captain.
And you were studying in the context of being an officer?
Yeah, so I thought, well, what happened was I started out my career as a private in the Royal Guards, playing the flute for the Queen, marching back and forth in the streets with the big bearskin hats and the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
That was like one of my main things. I had an identity crisis as I was living in the United States. I was 19 years old and I had no idea where I came from because I was so international.
Yeah.
And in Mexico, I never really felt like a Mexican because even though my mother was Mexican, I always felt like an outsider. And in Austria, where I was born, I was always an international kid, United Nations child, and my dad working for the UN. So I felt like I definitely wasn't Austrian in any way. And living in the United States, obviously, I was also a foreigner there. So I was always a foreigner. And
that's such a strange experience for me to imagine, because I always went to the same, like, middle school, everything. And then I went to the high school that was just on the other side of the street, and my mom went there before me and etc. So I was always super, like, from that
area.
place, you know. But you and many kids have, like, such a history of moving places and always being, quote unquote, the outsider, and that's something that is really hard to imagine for me.
Well, the grass is always greener on the other side, because a lot of people that have my kind of background, which is what is actually known as in my case, it's called a TCK, which stands for Third Culture Kid. and it's an actual sociological concept. I can't remember the name of the author. I have the book somewhere, where the concept of third culture kid is brought up, where you have a parent from one country, a parent from another country, and you live in a third country.
Oh yeah.
Third culture kid. And the TCKs that I know always kind of seem to wish that they had that background where everything was in one place.
Yeah.
I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but the people that I've spoken to, and I kind of have that as well. I'm proud of what I have. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, many of the people that we both know here are TCKs.
Yeah.
And I feel envious in many ways because they speak so many languages and they have this fluidity and this skill to adapt like chameleons.
Yeah, and it's really interesting actually to see how TCKs adapt. In fact, the whole concept of TCKs is incredibly interesting.
I never heard of it before.
I can only recommend that you pick up a book. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the author. She's really, really interesting to listen to, and there are also other authors who have taken the
I'm sure.
topic up, TCKs, and
and it's interesting because I guess the number of like these kids are gonna increase in number exponentially.
Oh yeah, and I mean, just see Berlin, see how many people there are here. It seems like everyone I've met in Berlin seems to come from somewhere else, basically.
But we're on an island, like.
Yeah, Berlin is very, very special as far as that goes, for sure.
Not practically an island, but metaphorically an island for sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you had the chance of traveling outside of Berlin in other parts of Germany, where it really reminds me of France. There, it's just like transposed in a German paradigm.
Yeah.
But and Paris, when I went back to Paris, I really felt like, wow, it becomes more and more international. It's like a mini Berlin.
Yeah.
It's like 10% what.
But
Berlin
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's-
For Parisians.
I mean, I know that for me if I can call me a Berliner, which is not, I mean, I've been living here for 3 years. I speak the language very badly, close to not at all. I'm not fluent. So I don't know if I can call myself one, but for me, the multiculturalism here is definitely a plus.
Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
For you as a foreigner, though.
Yeah, for me as a foreigner.
But as a Parisian, someone who's grown up there, and you have an international community.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the example of the Berliners, they are being ousted out by guys like me who come and make the rent go up.
That's right.
And now they just managed to protest and get a 5-year jail on the rents. But and from my perspective, it's really unfair to them because, just come there and. I mean, it's not directly our fault, but we make the rents go up, and like the original people are forced to leave and go more and more outside. And I guess in Paris it's the same, except that it's been that way for a long time now. Paris is very, very gentrified. It's much smaller than Berlin. Paris is the size of the ring, and it's so congested. It's
the ring being the inside of Berlin.
Yeah, the ring. Yeah. That's we have to make this precision. Yeah, the ring being the inside of Berlin with some kind of a peripheral train that goes all around, and it's really the center of Berlin. Yeah. And Paris is that size, and we have a boulevard périphérique, so a big street that goes all around Paris.
Same kind of concept.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know. I mean, I've spoken to some Berliners, and I can kind of see it from, and I think they can as well see it from both sides. I mean, I can definitely see the negative side of having your city overrun by non-native speakers and pushing up the rent and gentrifying everything and this and that. And at the same time, it brings a culture to your city which enriches everything, and everything just becomes more non-denominational, or whatever word you want to put to it. It's interesting, but it's I guess it can go both ways, and I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like in 20 years from now, or 50 years from now, for that matter.
Yeah, me too.
If we're still around in 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should hope for it. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I mean, I used to have a much more black and white binary vision of it, where I thought that the culture in Paris was either dead or institutionalized,
Mm.
like, big museums, big, like, the networks, the culture system. And here in Berlin was much more spontaneous. But actually, when I went back to Paris recently and I met up with Sasha from Lexodus,
Right. Yeah.
he showed me some, like, jazz clubs and stuff that I never knew existed. And I was like, wow, it's Paris, but it feels like Berlin.
Yeah.
Except that the trains don't go,
Mm.
don't run all night,
Yeah.
which is really a shame.
I mean, I'm definitely a city kid, and that's what I love about cities.
Yeah, me
is that
too.
you just
Me too.
you can rediscover your city in so many
Yeah.
different ways, and there's so many, because we have a tendency as humans to kind of get stuck in a 5 kilometer radius. My life is like that a lot. Even with the background that I do have from moving around, and maybe because of that, I don't know, but I have my band and I practice with them, and that's like within 5 kilometers from here, and I work every now and then where I teach some languages and this and that, and that's also within 5 kilometers, and the supermarket is within 5 kilometers, and the movie theater is within 5 kilometers. Everything seems like a radius of this little teeny tiny place. You kind of
That's the European city vibe.
Yeah.
Like, everything's mixed up all over the place, and you can walk or bike everywhere.
And it's strange that we do that, because I mean we have the whole city at our disposal.
Yeah.
But
I wanted to say, actually, we talk about Berlin, but really what we mean is Ostberlin.
For me, it's East Berlin for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, East Berlin.
Yeah.
Because I must have set foot less than 5 times in 3 years, like in Charlottenburg and all these. I never
Oh
go
gosh,
there.
it feels like you're on vacation or you're on holiday whenever you go to the West. It's weird. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a whole part of Berlin I don't know.
Yeah.
And all the northern part, like even like Gesundbrunnen and stuff, is not like an area I know that well. Even though there are a lot of nice bars in like Osloer Strasse and stuff.
But I think that's the case for any
Yeah.
city that you come from, that you can rediscover your city by just simply stepping foot out of that 5 kilometer or 10 kilometer radius, or wherever you tend to live your life. And I would say most of us, some of us even live our lives within a smaller radius, which is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue I know Berlin better than Paris.
Really?
I mean, I don't technically, yeah, of course, because I moved. And
okay.
because I moved, like the Prenzlauer Berg area close to Alexanderplatz,
Yeah.
I know everything there because I used to live there. And now I live in Friedrichshain.
Right.
So, yeah. And I lived for a short while in Lichtenberg.
Yeah.
Which was very short-lived. But yeah, so in that regard, maybe I know, because, yeah, I mean, I don't technically live in Paris. I live exactly on the border. I can walk to Paris in 5 minutes. Like
All right.
like the place I come from is called the 21st arrondissement.
So it's like a district.
Yeah, it's like called the 21st district of Paris.
Okay. Yeah.
And it looks more like Paris than some parts of Paris.
Really.
That's what I like to tell people. But Parisians being who they are, they will always like tell me, yeah, you're not from Paris. You know?
Yeah, I know that.
And yeah.
That concept. Yeah.
So yeah, technically I'm from banlieue.
Yeah.
The outskirts, but well. Yeah, so yeah, we kind of got sidetracked.
Yeah,
already,
so basically, I mean, the point being that I've traveled a lot and had this background.
You lived in like 6 or 7 countries, right?
Oh gosh, let me count. Well, I was born in Austria.
Yes.
And then I moved to Massachusetts, and then I moved back to Austria, which is a whole separate story. And then from there I moved to Denmark, short time, and that was actually to retain my citizenship, because I was a child at the time, and my father knew that if I didn't live
Oh, I didn't
there,
know that.
Yeah, I would lose my citizenship. I needed.
Don't you have jus sanguini?
Dual citizenship?
No, jus sanguini is like blood right. You know, like for example, if you want to get the French nationality, there are 2 ways to. I mean, there are more than 2 ways, but the 2 main ways to get it is jus soli and jus sanguini in Latin. So the ground right and blood right.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, I mean, in Danish law, I mean, I don't know the details of it, but from what I was told and the way we solved the problem was that you need a Danish personal number in order to, which is called the CPR number.
Okay.
the equivalent of a social security number. If you don't have that number, then you can lose your citizenship at a certain age. If you do have that number and have never lived in Denmark, then you lose your citizenship by the age of 21.
Okay.
So, first of all, I
So
needed
you have to live there.
before the age of 21, which is actually the reason, to get
Wow.
back to your question, I was in Mexico, and then I went back to the United States, and I was 19 at the time. And I didn't feel at home anywhere because I didn't feel like I belonged. And I had never lived in Denmark, but I had a Danish passport because I had the Danish CPR number. But that's what my father
Yeah, and you
made
didn't
sure.
and you didn't speak the
I
language.
didn't speak the language or anything. And I felt, well, I kind of want to go to Denmark. I'm Danish. I mean, I have a Danish father. I knew my Danish family. So I felt like I had to kind of become a Dane.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the age of 19, I chose to quit my job, leave everything behind, and just drop and go to Denmark and see what happens. And one of my, and also because I needed to live there before the age of 21 if I were to retain my Danish citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So it was perfect for me.
Okay.
And so that's, yeah.
That's 3 countries.
So what do we have? We have Austria, Mexico, United States, Denmark. So 4. Yeah, and then I moved to Denmark, and the first thing I did was, well, they saw that a Danish citizenship, or sorry, a Danish citizen. Is it recording or?
Yeah.
Yeah. That a Danish citizen had entered the country, so I was. Is it? That a Danish citizen had entered the country, so I was called into military session, is what it's called. Session is where you basically go there and pick a number, and if your number is lower than 36,000, you have to do service. If it's higher, you don't have to do service.
Oh, is that the way it's?
That's the way it works.
There's a lottery conscription.
There's a lottery conscription, yeah, basically. And I got 36,007 or something like that. I was just above the 36,000.
Wow.
And I didn't really speak Danish at the time, so I practiced the sentence from home that I wanted to join the Royal Lifeguards. And he explained to me, he said, well, you got 36,007, I think it was, which means you don't have to do service.
Yeah.
But if you want to do service, you get to choose where you want to go. And then I said, well, I'd like to join the Royal Lifeguards. Because to me, that was part of becoming a Dane. And then I just scrambled to learn the language. And obviously, then I started in the army, and I became a private in the Royal Guards. And while I was there, I learned to play the flute. Yeah. I did an audition on my guitar, which wasn't the plan at all.
The flute, like I don't know how it's called in English, but the straight flute.
No, a march flute. It's sideways, yeah.
Side flute.
A little short, like.
Oh, that's nicer.
Yeah. Really loud, really aggressive, yeah. Aggressive sound. It's short. It's a march flute. It's a lot. It's not like
okay. It's not like the classical.
Oh no.
Is it called side flute?
Oh,
I
what's the
have
name?
no idea.
I can't even remember the name.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. So, and I had no. I mean, I had to learn how to read notes and everything there in the army. That's another story. But the point being that I did my service there for 12 months, and then after that, I moved on to other things in life, and part of that was wanting to continue my career in the army as a sergeant, and so I did. And as I did that, I was moved around, and one thing led to another. And as I was educating myself within the military, I decided to move to Sweden.
Okay, so that's 5.
That's 5, yeah. And I did the first reserve officers course, which was meant to be a 2-year course.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you would have to do, that would be it. You do 2 years, and then you're out of the army.
Okay.
And that's basically it. It's different than being a regular officer. A regular officer, that's just basically the job you have. And so I did the 2 years, and my contract finished, basically. And I said, all right, I'm going to go study sociology. So I moved to the UK. And that's when I went there. And so we're at 6.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from there, I did the year at London Met. And then the Army contacted me and said, well, if you want to retain your contract as an officer, you can choose to go to Iraq. And so I did. And I thought, ooh, that's cool. I can use that for my degree. I mean, that's
The sociology degree.
yeah, because what they offered was civilian and military cooperation. It's called CIMIC in the Army. And what it is basically using local funds to reconstruct schools and roads and whatever infrastructure that you could deem necessary, and basically get them to use their own money. Where there's some controversy in the past where they did a lot of reconstruction work with funds from your own countries, basically funneling money out of Iraq and paying your own local contractors. I think that's the whole premise of this movie called Fahrenheit 9/11. I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So what we did was the exact opposite.
Wait, what was the name? Mr. Moore.
Yeah, Michael Moore.
I want to say Gary Moore, but
No, that's another Moore. Yeah, no, Michael Moore. That's
Yeah.
that was a big one. I've watched that as
Michael
well.
Moore is super famous American documentarian.
Oh, he's amazing. Yeah. I mean, he's also annoying as hell. but-
Fahrenheit 9/11.
yeah,
I
but
watched it when I was a kid. I did not understand
mm,
what it was about.
that was the premise of it. It's that they were basically using Halliburton to, and I mean, I don't know. I'm not a politician. I'm just an officer. So I don't know the details of it, but I remember watching that and getting pretty angry.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was very much against the war also, which is really strange. And I remember asking myself whether I wanted to be deployed to Iraq as an officer, and being against the war and being against the whole idea and
Yeah. You know Fahrenheit 451?
I haven't watched that. No, is that like a
It's a book.
yeah? Oh, it's a book.
Yeah, the first book I read. in
Right.
English,
I was
actually.
thinking of the one with the twin towers. He just made another one, right? It's called something else.
Oh no, I mean it's a book, and I think like Fahrenheit 9/11. That's a reference to that book.
Okay.
By Ray Bradbury, who's a super famous, the
Hmm.
Mars Chronicles, super famous sci-fi writer, and it's in the vein of Brave New World and 1984,
Oh yeah.
because it's the story of a fireman called Montag, but what he does is that he sets books on fire.
Oh yeah.
Autodafé, yeah, and 451, that's the in Fahrenheit degrees.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
when paper starts to burn,
Uh-huh.
and
No spoilers, by the way.
No. And I really recommend it, but I think maybe it's interesting. I interrupted you, but like related to what you were saying.
Yeah. No. That's
Because
yeah.
this guy is basically a fireman who sets stuff on fire.
Yeah. But yeah. But
So
I mean,
you went anyways.
well, I had to make logic of it, and although I have always said I'm not a politician, I'm an officer. In this case, I had to, for moral reasons, make a decision whether this is something I wanted to take part in or not. And my contract was officially up, so me picking the contract back up and continuing my career would mean that I'd have to make some moral decisions. And the way I saw it was, all right, it's a CIMIC mission, meaning that I'm there to stimulate the local economy by picking local contractors and reconstructing things that they need: schools, water stations, this and that, et cetera. And therefore, for me, it was more like, well, the war happened. We can't change that.
Yeah.
But I can do my part in repairing what I can. And the thing is, a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, were unable to operate there at the time because it was too dangerous. So the only way to reconstruct and do actual NGO work was to have military forces and units like ours, which was basically officers, all officers, driving around, having meetings with the local sheikhs and governors, and establishing what needs there were in the local community, and then finding tenders, finding contractors. Tenders, yeah. So basically, you get 3 tenders per contract, which means offers, 3 offers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then you choose one of them based on the best plans.
Yeah.
And obviously, we had experts who were there, engineers who were there to be able to deem whose plan was the best for the certain project, et cetera, et cetera. So that to me felt like I could do that and still feel okay about it.
Yeah,
But
fair enough.
The truth in real life is very, very different. We had some good experiences and we had some bad experiences. In total, we had 603 projects that we made there, reconstruction projects, to the point where when I finished my tour, we had 603 projects, which I can feel really good about. I'll give you this example. Before leaving, I was told that if I wanted to call local schools in Denmark and ask if they wanted to donate furniture for Iraqi schools that needed furniture, that I would be able to fill up, I think it was 2 or 3 containers for just that purpose. So that's great. So I got on the phone and I said, "Hi, this is blah 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 blah. Would you be willing to donate furniture or equipment or anything for the schools in Iraq?" And they did, and I managed to fill up the 3 containers. And the moment we got there, we distributed the furniture to the schools, which is great, and we took photos of it and did this whole thing and wrote an article about it. And then a local journalist said that here come the Western troops who've occupied our country and then use cheap furniture as propaganda for this and that. And it basically, in his article, also incited violence in order to get back at us for this propaganda stunt. And it turned into violence, basically. As far as I know, they attacked our troops on multiple occasions because not only that, but because that turned into hatred for our troops. Another example was when we
That sounds, yeah.
We made a project where we said, all right, so the local governor says they need sports facilities, so we built a soccer field where the kids could play soccer, football. And so we did. And the next day, the field was completely destroyed. They had taken a SUV or something and done wheelies on it. And we had a sign with the Danish flag and the Iraqi flag, and it said, in Arabic, it said, "Denmark and Iraq working towards the future," or something like that. And they had shot out the Danish flag completely and destroyed the field and basically destroyed everything. Another example, a third example was, well, we were told they needed water stations water installations in their homes, because what they had to do up to that point is they had to walk for kilometers and kilometers to pick up water from their homes and pick them up at the wells and then bring them back. So we said, all right, that's great. So we did a project and we arranged for them to get water in their homes. And that cost the life of one of my colleagues, basically, because that was in direct retaliation, is what we found out afterwards, for that, because what happened was that was the only time the women from the houses were able to get together and get out of the houses And that was basically their time away and their time together. So by us installing water in their homes, we took away that freedom from them. So now they had to stay home. And that was directly correlated to violence through their husbands or brothers or whatever, who then would lay out IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and this and that, one of which hit us. And that was exactly the same area. So whether it did have a direct correlation to that or not is still up for debate, but that was the report, saying that because we had people on like boots on the ground, like to figure out what the local situation was, and it seemed like every single time we did our best to help them out, somehow, some way, it ended up costing our guys' lives, basically. And yeah, I mean, it was psychologically, I can't imagine anything worse.
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to do some damn good in the world, right? And these sorry, but these bastards were doing everything in their power, even if it's just a handful of them, to destroy you. And then you can say, well, okay,
Yeah.
I am occupying their country. Maybe that's why. And I had this conflict inside, because I thought I was doing my best to help out in a situation where NGOs... Now, if NGOs had done these projects, which would be the exact same projects the Red Cross would do, or United Nations is an IO, international organization, but other organizations that would have done this, I'm not sure that they would have received as much hatred or violence as we did, simply because of who we were, because we were wearing the uniform.
The colors you were flying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I walked away from that very confused.
Although it's like you have stories like that as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why we were there, because it was too dangerous for them.
Yeah.
So I walked away from that whole situation very, very confused. And then again, while I was in Iraq, then they said, all right, if you want to... So I guess that counts as 7, huh? Sort of.
Yeah.
And while I was there, they said, well, we have another mission for you. If you want to retain your rank and retain your contract, then we can offer you a United Nations unarmed observer post. You'll be the eyes and ears of the Security Council for the mission in Ethiopia and Erythrea, basically reporting military movement and this and that, and what the local situation is like, and it's going to be a year, so it's longer than most missions. And would you be up for that? And I immediately said, yeah, sure, of course, because in my mind this was in line with trying to save the world. And this time I was going to be not flying the red and white of the Danish flag, but the blue and white from the United Nations.
Yeah.
And my father being a United Nations man, and the background I had, it felt natural. And I was unarmed, sometimes not even in uniform, because we had to work with NGOs, and NGOs do not talk to, well, not all, but a lot of them, like Doctors Without Borders, would not talk to military personnel.
Yeah, and you could understand why they would not do it, because
of course.
It will be construed as taking sides, and
exactly.
could lead to...
Yeah. So for this reason, we were quite often in civilian clothing and acting as civilians, and we never had weapons because we were observers only. And I got there, and well, long story short,
because it's a very, like, this area is a very unstable area to this day.
Yeah, it is.
Because I mean, I don't know much about the history, but I know Erythrea used to be part of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
I don't know if it goes back to the time when they were called Abyssinia. But
no, it's very new. Eritrea is very, very
new. And
new.
they split, and they became the so-called North Korea of Africa.
Yeah. Well, that's putting it in extreme
I don't know
words.
much about the subject. I'm just...
Yeah, no. Many people would disagree with you, but they are more restrictive than Ethiopia. But one of the things that struck me there was the racism. the racism within the United Nations is something that I have never experienced anywhere else, and you wouldn't think it
What do you mean?
internally. I'll put it this way. At the time, there was a controversy where I think some cartoonist drew some cartoons about the Prophet
Yeah,
Muhammad. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
in Denmark.
In Denmark, yeah.
Yeah, I heard of this.
Yeah, and we
Yeah, and
felt...
all the embassies were attacked all around the
Yep,
world in Muslim
yep.
countries, etc.
And we felt the
Muslim majority
aftermath of
countries.
that. We felt the aftermath. I got to the point where even speaking to a Jordanian officer who refused to shake my hand because I was Danish,
Guilty by association.
apparently, yeah, which I thought was completely pathetic. But the racism was, it went both ways, I would say, from Western to non-Western countries. But the fact was that there were two headquarters. There was one in Ethiopia and one in Eritrea. And the one in Eritrea was basically the one which was carrying out the mission. The problem was that they would not allow Western officers in Eritrea. Only non-Westerns were allowed there. But the headquarters in Ethiopia, where the Westerners were allowed to be in, had basically no say. So the main headquarters was the place where only non-Westerners were allowed to be. And the hatred, the segregation of tasks, of power, military and non-military, that went towards Western troops was incredible. I mean, troops because we were all officers at these missions. We did have some peacekeepers, which were boots on the ground, but those were primarily, at that point, were from India and countries like, I think we had some Jordanians also. Most of the Western troops on the ground were only in the beginning of the mission. Towards the end of the mission, there really wasn't that much. And we had basically, as a Western officer in Ethiopia, we had no say, no power, nothing. Because everything was run from Eritrea, where we were not allowed to be. So...
Did you set foot in Erythrea or?
No.
No, you didn't.
No, it wasn't allowed. Wasn't allowed. And the level of racism that I experienced working for the United Nations is something I don't wish to repeat. I still believe in the United Nations. I still believe in the concept and the idea behind it, but it's rotting from the inside. And I'm not afraid to say it. A lot of people are, and a lot of people believe that it goes against a lot of people don't even know that it exists.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you that what I've seen in my experience is disgusting. As far as how people, and maybe it's on a personal level.
Within the UN.
And it's on a personal level. It's between, you're mixing people from different countries and different cultures and expecting them to get along. And guess what? They don't. Because they're humans. And maybe the organization itself works, but whenever you do have humans working as individuals, they're going to corrupt a situation to their liking. And if they are able to twist a political will that will allow you to retain power in a certain way, it's going to happen. And that's exactly what happens in any organization, any political organization. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's why you need a cleverly made constitution and checks and balances and separations of powers. And even that doesn't...
And we're back into politics, and I'm not a politician. I don't...
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, as a soldier...
But maybe we could draw some species comparison with the European Union, because UN and the EU are both wonderful ideas, and very often when we
when we have conversations about those, you have to differentiate between talking about the idea, which itself is a beautiful idea, and the practicalities of it.
Yeah.
Which is often much more sticky and complicated.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting to hear your take on it.
And you're right. And whenever I hear about Brexit, I mean, Brexit is a fucking circus. We can all agree on that. But although I would have definitely, if I were a British citizen, I would have probably voted stay, like to stay in the EU. I can definitely see the arguments, and I can see not only the arguments, I can see the frustration that the EU is, surprise, surprise, an organization just as any other, which can get corrupted by individuals. And whether that's the fault of the EU as an organization, or whether it's the fault of individuals, or the twisting of a will, is up for debate. I still believe in the idea, and I think what the vote should be based on is the idea and the concept of the EU, and allow that to survive. But I can see how other issues should be addressed, for sure.
I mean, the problem of these organizations might be, and it's just my take on it, of course, but it's a scale problem. Because we were talking about the Dunbar number and the fact that chimpanzees can interact on a personal basis with about 50 chimpanzees, and we can do it. Dunbar's number is 150.
Yeah.
So we can do it with 150 people, which seems to be our superpower as a species, and more than anything else, the reason why we are, 9 billion? 8 billion?
8.
A bunch of billions. Billions and billions.
Billions and billions and China.
But yeah, and the thing is, Nassim Taleb would say that, like, with scale, the more you scale up a company, the more the accountability, individual accountability goes down, because it's not the same if you're sticking it out for your father and your brother and your sister, or if you're doing it for your friends, or if you're doing it for your, I don't know, small scale association, or if you're doing it for the Danish people or the French people, or a group that is so big that you cannot even apprehend it, and as a result, your qualms to betray it. I mean, you are much more easily tempted, because the lobbyists are just walking free in the European Parliament. We know it, and offering boat rides and like fancy dinners and God knows what else. And we can blame the politicians all we want, but at the end of the day, I don't know if I personally would be more virtuous, and I don't know that many people would be. We would need to have the Dalai Lama in every.
And I mean, there is a certain negativity.
And also there is this feeling, there are so many.
Yeah.
There are like, 600? I don't know, but it feels like each vote that they cast is a drop in the ocean.
I will say I don't know enough about it to say how it can be fixed, but I think the key word that you said is accountability. I know the United Nations a lot better than I know the EU, which is embarrassing, to be honest, being an EU citizen. But but that's the truth.
You would not be the only one.
That's the truth of the matter. And the thing is, the less accountability there is, the less an organization is going to be affected and change. And this is what happened in the United Nations. You have an isolated mission, because the United Nations is an organization. It's a giant. The United Nations is it's an umbrella term for different organizations. There's UNESCO, UNIDO, etc. And then under that, or parallel to that actually, you have the missions, like United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Erythrea, United Nations mission in Sudan, UNMISS, etc. And you have all these missions, which all have their own doctrine and their own rules, their own agreements, and ultimately their own internal politics. And the less a mission is regarded as interesting or important in the media, and UNMI was definitely one that was forgotten, the more it is allowed to rot from the inside. Why? Because there's no accountability. So when I say what I'm saying right now about the United Nations and the racism that I've encountered within it, although I stand by it and I realize it's controversial.
But in that case, it would be more
on me. not UN as a exactly.
And is it? Yeah.
They could maybe they have a completely different.
Yeah, it depends also how we define racism, because more than the fact that you were white, it's more the Denmark part. Or were they giving shit?
No, they're giving shit to everyone.
Okay.
If you were Western.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, this was absolute racism. You can't twist it in any other way. It was, you were born into this skin color, therefore we hate you. If that's not racism, I don't know what is.
I mean, that is pretty much the textbook definition of racism.
That's what it is. So,
yeah.
If by being Western or white or whatever, or blue or gray or silver or whatever color you want to be, somehow you're exempt from that definition, then let that be. But what I was experiencing was and it went both ways. Like I said, there was also racism the other way. It's just disgusting in every way.
Yeah, I mean, hatred breeds hatred.
Exactly, and resentment.
Yeah.
And revenge and this and that. And me being...
Yeah, which tends to show that is... I mean, that's the us versus them mentality and the
tribalism,
the basest instincts of tribalism.
Exactly, yeah. And it's alive and well.
Yeah.
We're experiencing it now on social media, but it's always been present throughout human history.
Yeah. I mean, human nature doesn't change. It's just the context in which we put it, and that's why we have to really build.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard, but try and build a set of... an environment and a set of incentives is the word I was looking for, to bring out the best in the human nature, which is pretty much fixed, like, except if we can, like, CRISPR, just piece our genome away, build cameras and cyborgs, but we're not there yet, thankfully. Maybe. So
we'll see.
That's another subject.
We'll see. That's a different subject. Yeah.
So the count is 8. We are.
I think we're at 8. Yeah.
8 countries, but there's. So it was actually an underestimation on my part.
Well, and then we have Germany, which is 9, and I think we stop at 9 because.
For now.
For now, yeah. But anyway, I walked away from that mission and I came home and I was.
But you lived also in different place, in America, which I mean it's just the idea of country, but a state like
2 different. Massachusetts and Oklahoma is like 2 different.
It doesn't get much more different than that.
Exactly.
I mean,
the only thing they have in common is a language, really, and
maybe Alaska is more different. I don't know. I have never been there.
Me neither. I'd love to go to Alaska.
Yeah.
But
Me too.
so
pay a visit to Sarah Palin.
Yeah, gosh, yeah.
That was my first contact with American politics, actually, and I was amazed.
Sarah Palin.
I mean, I'm getting political now. You don't know Sarah Palin?
Yeah, I know her, but I know her politics as well. But that was your first contact with American politics?
Yeah, back in the day, 2008, when Obama got elected.
Yeah. Oh, I remember.
Everybody in France was, I mean, maybe not everybody. I don't have a decent sample, but everybody was so excited about Obama getting elected.
Yeah.
And actually, I read somewhere that David Palmer was a very good precursor for Obama, and that David Palmer.
No,
David Palmer is the black president in 24. You know the series 24 with Kiefer Sutherland?
Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I remember.
I think it's the 5th season, and it's the first I watched.
I watched like everything while I was in Ethiopia, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the first series I really watched, and I mean now when you look back on it, it's so cliche because the bad guys are either. In one season, it's the Russians, and then it's the Arabs, and then it's the Chinese.
Yeah.
So it's like all the.
I love that show, though.
I'm looking forward to one with Italians or something. I mean, maybe Italians would make sense because of the mafia history, but like
Jack Bauer
French
against the mafia.
Yeah, we really don't need that. Like we have French bashing because of one of the only good decisions we ever took in terms of overseas politics in the past 20 years, which was not to take part in the Iraq war.
Right, yeah, I remember there was a lot. And Germany didn't either. Germany was against it.
Yeah, but they don't have an army. I mean, they have like a joke of an army.
What, Germany?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right now they're having economic problems. They're not
No, but also
they're not
because
well funded.
It's the aftermath of the Second World War.
Yeah, well, it's getting a lot better, but...
They don't have an air force. Like the number, I mean, they do, but it's ridiculously small compared to France and even to the UK. The UK, they have like maybe the second biggest. I think I would have to double check. But yeah, we have our army and
France is...
80 million people
in...
in Germany and only 66 in France, but our army is about twice as big, and we have flight carriers and submarines, like nuclear submarines.
It's a financial question, also a cultural question in the in Germany, where there's a very prominent anti-militarism that's present in the culture, and I think it has a lot to do with it, and also the funding. I mean, they have.
Yeah, I mean, there is a multi-varied explanation for sure of just the trauma, the Schuldfrage.
But all of you, look, man,
the fact that we have, I mean, of course, it's probably a bit of an overstatement, but the hands on their throat.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there was the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, and there were, I mean, it's probably one of the most stupid,
Yeah.
I'm not a pro in counterfactual history, probably one of the stupid decisions we made to enact such an iniquitous treaty and then not to have them respected because they remilitarized Renani and started to build airplanes, all of that stuff they were not supposed to do, while having I forgot the name in German, but like the stabbing in the back theory, which led to World War II, among other things, and the fact that they were able to carry on the Blitzkrieg and yeah.
But I mean, the current situation right now with all the European armies is that everything is underfunded. I mean, it's really, really bad. I can tell you. In Denmark, the funding went almost exclusively to troops that were deployed, and the troops that were back home training. Had very limited funds, and it was. I think it's better now, but it's. At the time, we had this standing joke in the army because we were told that we didn't have money for ammunition, for blanks, for practice. So we had to say bang bang instead. And so we had this standing joke of this guy. He's standing watch, and it's nighttime, and it's quiet and dark, and he sees something move in the distance. And he says, "Stop, or I'll shoot." And this figure just starts getting closer and closer. Nothing happens. "Stop, or I shoot." And he gets closer and closer, keeps on moving. And then he goes, "Bang, bang, 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 bang." Nothing happens, keeps on moving. And it's this dude in the distance, and he just keeps walking and walking. Bang, 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 bang. Nothing happens. Finally, the guard jumps on the guy's back, and he says, "Stab, stab, 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 stab." And then the guy says, "Tank, tank, tank." Pretending to be a tank because there's no money for anything. And that's the sadness of the situation. It's the reality. And I remember doing that. And we used to say bang, bang, and it felt as stupid as it gets. But and didn't have money for diesel and that kind of thing. It's and it's the same in Germany. It's the same in all European. It's changing now, hopefully, but it's a question of how much money you allocate to the different troops. And there's a definite anti-militarism. And gosh, and tell me about it. I mean,
that's for sure.
I experienced it,
and it's a hard sell.
It is a hard sell, and even getting a job as a civilian afterwards, it's like you almost want to hide the fact that you used to be in the army. Because I know why I did it. I did it because I thought it was in line with my upbringing. I grew up in a United Nations school with a class of 32 kids from pretty much 32 countries, and we were international all the way. And this is just how I was brought up, and I thought, okay, this is a way to actually make a difference, right? And I used it as a catalyst to change the world. And obviously, I mean, this sounds kind of pretentious, but that's what I started out like. Before I was in the army, I toured with a band, and I was in the United States. I played music, and
maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, we should talk about music too. Yeah. But the point is that it was along the lines of my ideas of what was right and wrong, and now I am in the other end of it, and I have to kind of pretend that I wasn't in the army.
Yeah, I mean, there are also, I guess, many misconceptions, and
as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I don't have tiniest experience when it comes to the army, but I'm sure I would appreciate the brotherhood and the sorority or adelphity or however we want to call it. But it's true that when you see, for example, Joko Willink talking about the Battle of Ramallah and how like they fought and they lost some people there.
Yeah.
Whether or not, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, whether or not it was a smart thing to do. Yeah. And then 2 years later, the city has been taken back because they took the troops out because they had some administrative problem or financial issue. Which is absurd.
Oh, you take a hill or something and you lose half your unit. I mean, I haven't, but I'm talking about like Vietnam or other conflicts. And then like the next day, the enemy has it again just because you had to pull out because of some stupid political or financial reason.
Yeah, it is. I think the word is absurd, yeah.
And you lose, but the thing is, human life kind of gets pushed aside, and that's exactly what I experienced in Iraq also. I felt like we had, and also in Afghanistan, I wasn't in Afghanistan, but a lot of my colleagues were, and they started dropping like flies, man. Like I remember watching on YouTube, and it seemed like every month there was like a new post of now this guy died, and now that guy died, and I was like, these are people I used to know. These are my colleagues. These are my friends, and I just couldn't. I had to quit Facebook for a while, and I changed profiles and everything, and got rid of.
I cannot even imagine.
Well, it's just, and you think, for what? For what? I mean, these kids, they go there, officers, privates, soldiers, sergeants, whatever. They go there for whatever reason, whether it's wanting to have an adventure or because it's like me, wanting to change the world or whatever other reason you have for going. They're human beings, and then they get killed for what? So that a politician can get reelected or something? And that's what really weighs hard on your shoulders as a soldier.
Yeah, I don't know how you can deal with it.
I don't know how anybody could deal with it, but in general, I mean, it's maybe not even an army thing. It's just in general how life is devalued. It's But maybe life shouldn't have as much value as we want to give it.
Well, that's a dangerous place to go.
It is, but you think about it because everything. We want to make life so damn valuable. I'll give you another story. We were in Ethiopia, and we had a couple of guys there, and we were in what's it called, convoy, and we had to pass. One of our cars had to pass a bus, and the people were getting off the bus, and then a child ran in front of the bus as the convoy was passing, and they hit the kid, killed him on the spot. The driver, who was, let me think, I think he was a Russian guy, great guy, by the way, jumps out, picks up the kid, and the kid basically dies in his arms, right? And to you and me, you were like, oh, holy fuck, and he was also completely distraught and like, wow. The family asked for a bag of rice in compensation. And once they received their bag of rice, they were okay with it. And then you ask yourself, is that what the kid was worth?
Yeah, that sounds...
To us, it's inconceivable.
No, that's inconceivable.
But to them, it was just another kid, because there were so many of them, and a lot of them aren't even taken care of, and they're roaming in the streets. And I don't know the dynamics of it, but all I can tell you is I was shocked about the I was shocked about the indifference.
Yeah.
That came with that situation. That was just one of many. We had many other situations like that where I thought to myself, well, what is human life worth?
What country was that in?
That's Ethiopia.
Because it makes me think that's
kind
of the way we used to think about kids back in the day in Europe before the demographic transition.
So when people had a plethora of kids, many of whom died just by, just by being born, died in the first year or 2 years, and where people were much sadder when you lost an elder, because an elder is a living repository of knowledge, a library.
Sounds grotesque and absurd to think about now, though.
Yeah, and now it's the opposite, because when we see a kid dying, we just have to mourn for all this potential. That is lost. And that will never be realized in the world. But when we lose an elder, it's like, that's the cycle of life. So we don't feel that sad about it. So it's such an interesting turning of point of views.
It is, and this is one of the things that, I'll tell you, from those two missions, I felt a level of frustration that I think few people will. I think it's difficult to say, because like war veterans often feel isolated from society in a certain way, and we tend to think that, well, maybe it's because they've seen the horrors of war and blood and guts and this and that. No, the horror is a lot in part of the indifference that they have experienced, not only there, but also the indifference from their own people, their own politicians, the devaluing of life, and maybe trying to readapt to society is a different
so you say it's not a sight or an experience, it's more higher level psychological trauma
for a lot of us, not all of us. Obviously, I've talked to guys that have experienced really, really bad stuff. I have as well, but that's not what sticks with me at all. That's to think about that humans have experienced blood and guts for centuries. If you just could go back 100 years or 200 years, that was the norm. If you were a male, you were expected to fight, and that was just part of you. And it was just part. I think now we're more of an isolated kind of society where we kind of believe we live in this peaceful. We're living in Pax Americana, is what I call it. Which is
after Pax Romana and Pax Britannica.
Exactly. And with.
Although these days, like with the whole situation like at hand right now, it seems like there is a change in the global situation.
Yeah, but the chances that you or somebody else or the average male or female will experience blood and guts are minimal compared to what it was 200 years ago.
Yeah, of course. You don't see dead people in the street.
You don't. And if you do,
it used to be a daily.
Yeah, exactly.
It used to be something that was.
So I think what my point is that I think I'm not an expert in this, but I think that as a species we have evolved to kind of, we can deal with that. There's this social aspect of it which will obviously traumatize you, but I think the traumatizing aspects of it come from different sources. It's how it's tackled, how it's handled, and how what's expected of you afterwards, and maybe even before, your lack of preparation into a certain situation. It's the things on the side that
really get
to you. Yeah, because obviously you have firefighters also, and you have police folk and people like that also experience all sorts of violence. And I'm not saying that they don't get PTSD. I'm sure they do, a lot of them, but a lot of them don't, and it's because the situation is different. See what I mean? It could also be a little girl that got into an accident and bled to death in their arms or something, right?
I used to have a teacher in when I was studying law in France who was I don't know how it's called, how I would translate that, but it's Brigade des Mineurs. So she would take care of take care of like little kids
Mhm.
and stuff that happened to them.
Okay.
And I mean, she took some depositions and stuff.
Yeah.
And apparently it was horrible stuff sometimes, traumatizing stuff. I
Yeah.
cannot even imagine. Yeah.
But I think the
And it
actual
happens right there in your country.
exactly, yeah, and it's incredible what they have to go through and what they endure. But what I'm saying is that I think humans are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah,
in this,
anti-fragile even.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what we experienced, a lot of what I experienced afterwards, is more on a socio-political level. It's more of
Yeah, it's a crazy thing to think about, because all that you're describing, I know that it exists on an abstract level, and that's really a testament to the idea of the hedonic treadmill. You heard of that?
no.
It's like,
Or have I? I think I might have. Yeah.
I mean, you probably know the idea is that wherever, if something great happens to you,
Mhm.
after a couple of days you stabilize, and vice versa.
Mm.
If something horrible happens to you, after a couple of days you stabilize.
Mm.
And it's just I know that just in terms of world history, I am so amazingly privileged. I'm part of the percent of the percent of the percent.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
And me and all the people I know who are in a bubble and sheltered from all of that horror, we should be on a permanent little cloud of happiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, I mean, if we go back to talking about the music, I'm just surprised at how many musicians have some form of depression.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back for part 2, and now hopefully we're going to talk about music a little bit more. Yeah, art and music, and how your unique life experience reflects in the music you're creating, your approach, the way you put a band together, Substereo. And maybe I'm just guessing there. I mean, it's an educated guess, but how you would deal with the band members, the way you dealt with, like, I don't know, people that were under your command, and so on and so forth. But yeah, maybe you could start by introducing the band Substereo.
Yeah, so Substereo is a band that I created after I came back from my experiences being deployed in Iraq and Ethiopia, and I had a long process where I was trying to find myself after I came back. As many of us were affected by the different experiences, and as we talked about before, there was a certain level of frustration on a socio-political level where you get back into society and you're trying to adjust and this and that. But more importantly for me was it turned out to be a quest to kind of figure out, like, why the hell am I doing this? Like, why am I an officer? Why am I a soldier? Why am I doing the things I'm doing? And well, long story short is I ended up speaking to a psychologist who really helped me along the way, and asked me a question. He said, he asked me why I'm doing what I'm doing, and it took me a while to answer it. But when I did get back to him, what the conclusion I had come to was that I was basically doing the job in order to live up to a standard, which was a standard which I had made up in my mind to live up to my father in many ways. I was doing it for prestige. I was doing it for recognition. And at the end, he asked me to explore within myself what I would do if those things weren't relevant, if there were no expectations from other people externally, and what my internal needs were. And this is where I
In a perfect world.
In a perfect, well, perfect or perfect in my, from my perspective, yeah. And this is where I came back and said, all right, I think I'll just play guitar all day long. And we kind of laughed at that, but I thought about that, and it really kind of, he never made me quit or anything like that, but it pushed me over the edge just enough for me to realize that it was more important for me to I know it sounds cheesy, but follow your heart or whatever, it seems like the world puts you on a certain path, and then somehow we get diverted to ignore that calling and just go for what we believe is more important or what is expected of us.
Follow your heart. The thing is, I wonder of course it sounds cheesy and that's something that you hear a lot. But is it a mirage? In the sense that you have the deep-seated feeling that that's what you did, you followed your heart. But the question that I'm wondering right now is that, did you follow your heart at the time? Or right now, when you're telling your story to yourself and to others, is it the way you decide to portray it? Because for me, as far as I'm concerned with my life, some events that seemed like nothing at the time shaped my life to such an extent. And the great meaning that they have comes from the layers and layers of things that happened in the causal chain afterwards. So in that case, maybe it's not the first time you saw a psychologist. Maybe
it was at that point.
Yeah, maybe 1,000 things happened to you, and that was just the straw the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah,
and that's what you did, and it's great. But it's just like when you do it, it doesn't feel like such a great deal. But then when you look back...
nothing feels like a great deal while you're doing it. It's amazing.
But when you look back on it, it's like, wow, that was a milestone.
Yeah, I know. And it's crazy because I've had this conversation with other people also where we're talking about how damn boring it was when you were in the situation. Like from day to day, you're like, oh, nothing is happening. And then you turn back 3 years later and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a veteran of 2 wars, like...
Yeah.
Or I did this trip there and I did this trip there, and I was whatever your experience was. When you're in the situation, it never seems that glamorous, but when you look back on it, it does. And there's no doubt in my mind that I don't regret what I experienced at all. I have learned a lot about myself, about the world, and this and that, and I'm sure it has formed a lot of the music that I've created afterwards. I mean, I played music before then, and I played music while I was in the army. I was recording demos while I was in the army, and I did all of this stuff. So I never gave up music. It was always a part of my life. It was a part of who I am. My mother, as I mentioned before, was a concert pianist, piano teacher also. Her background in the Mexican side of the family is also extremely artistic. We're connected to the Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo part of the family, and there's a lot of there are other aspects which also have painted my Mexican side of the family. My father was a musician, also a sociologist. The Mexican side was also associated with sociology and positivism in Mexico and this and that. So everything that my background and family had laid out for me, the premise of who I was to be or able to be, laid out a clear path in front of me, which I was able to take, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the things that I've learned. But there's no doubt in my mind that music or even painting or just creativity in general has always been the way that I have been able to express myself.
Yeah, because you play music, you sing, you write, you're working on a book at the moment, you do stop motion, so you're painting and putting models together, photography. So
I'm trying. Well, I'd incorporate anything that is necessary for me to communicate a thought or an idea, and whether that's music, lyrics, books, drawings, paintings, whatever.
So in that sense, it's a form of world building.
It's a form of communication, is what it is. And this has been my argument from the very beginning. I've had this conversation with other musicians because people have asked me before. I said, well, if you want to be a musician, why don't you just teach, or why don't you play in a cover band or something? All respect to people who play in cover bands. I'm not putting that down in any way, but for me, it's not enough, because even just saying I'm a musician is not really an answer, because I'm not a musician. I am a...
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also the uniqueness of music right there, because the word musician has a very wide meaning, and you have musicians that are more like music technicians.
It could be anything.
I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are great musicians. They play they are greatly skilled.
Yeah.
At whatever instrument or instruments they play, and they can play. They have a great repertoire, and they etc. etc.
Exactly.
And then there are artists. And there is...
I was going to say communicators, like communicators of thoughts, but yeah, okay, artists. But the artist is also a very broad term, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's even broader.
Yeah.
But yeah, communicators, people that want to create within the music realm. And there is a lot of overlap there. So it's not a very good definition, because even like a session drummer, in every stroke, they create something.
Yeah.
And there is a very technical aspect to world building, or whatever you decide to call it, communication, because you're also like an amateur, pretty good amateur recording engineer, mixing, mastering, etc. So there is a lot of skills that come into this. Yeah.
I think it's really just about accumulating the skills necessary in order to communicate your thought, and that's why I have gravitated from describing myself a musician. Also because I feel like I'm not worthy of the title musician, because to me a musician is somebody who's able to really dive into music theory, at least be able to read music really well, or whatever. There are some certain skills. My mother is a musician. She is a piano player, and she will read notes like you can read a book. I mean,
there is no universally accepted definition of musician.
I get it, but at the same time, I feel like there are certain levels of skill necessary to be able to call yourself that, which I do not have. What I do have is an ability to express myself through music. So
that's what you call yourself, a communicator?
Yeah, or a storyteller. But a storyteller sounds more like somebody who writes books, and I do more than that. So I think communicator is probably a good way to put it, because you're communicating feelings and thoughts, and the more skilled you become at the different disciplines, the more you're able to communicate that. And
yeah, but that's a weird elevator pitch.
Yes and no.
What do you do? I'm a communicator.
Well,
that's...
yeah, it doesn't. I know. But on the other hand, who cares? Because do you need an elevator pitch? What you need is a product. And then again,
no, you don't.
And the thing is, I've had this conversation with a lot of musicians who say, well, I'd be perfectly content sitting in my basement playing guitar, they tell me, right? And to which I answer, I'm not sure I would be. Because I need somebody to listen. Why? Because to me, music is a form of communication. We're back to the communicator thing. And to me, just playing for yourself, which is absolutely nothing wrong with, by the way, but for me, is like talking to the wall. And if nobody listens, and you're just talking to a wall in an empty room, at some point, you're going to go crazy.
Yeah, I can relate to that, because it's a trajectory I have followed. I'm following myself. And I can see how absurd it would be to be alone in your basement, as you said, and just repeating poems.
Yeah,
making
exactly.
sure that every syllable sounds perfect.
Yeah.
But with nobody to be emotionally touched by it.
There's an intrinsic need for us as humans to being animals that are in need of social contact, to be able to communicate with other beings and have those thoughts understood and shared, feelings that we are able to share, and to me that's...
Yeah, and to enrich each other.
Yeah.
That is kind of the scenius
Brian Eno is talking about,
Yeah.
right? That, I mean, you don't only read poems to your friends because you want your poems to be heard, but it's because they elicit reactions and ideas, and then they create something, and there is some kind of a virtuous circle of creation that takes place.
Exactly. So as a direct consequence of the sessions that I had with the psychologist and my own conclusions, which I drew, I decided to establish the band Substereo. And we started out by recording our first album, Fuel for the Revolution, with a producer from the United States, from LA, Tito Godwin. He was the one who produced
No Doubt.
No Doubt, and Motley Crue, and worked with some other.
Oh, Motley Crue.
Yeah, and
Wow.
he worked with what's his name, the guy from Kiss. Also, he had some
Ace Frehley.
the drummer,
No.
the drummer. Pete,
the
Pete,
cat.
Pete,
I don't know. That's
Peter,
the only
yeah.
one. I don't know him.
That's
but the cat
embarrassing.
guy.
I should know that. But anyway, the point is that we worked with him, and he helped us out with our first album, and it was great. It was a studio production, and everything was as you would expect it to be, and like you see it in the movies, you know. With it was beautiful, and we ended up with a really nice sound. And after that, we ended up with a product that, although was nice, I felt didn't really reflect our most inner fears and emotions, and it didn't really feel that, like, it didn't have the integrity that I wanted it to have. And we're back to the word integrity. Like, what is integrity in music?
That's the $1 million question.
It is. And what is it? And I can define it
Can you?
in my mind, but I can't define it in words. And I can try. I mean, to me, integrity is when you have a product and you are able to share an emotion through real experiences, real tangible things, which can then be communicated out to somebody and then received by somebody and then reflected by their own experiences, where they can draw meaning out of your experiences, whether it be direct or indirect.
Yeah, I can relate to that
Mhm.
because I mean, at first glance, it seems like, I mean, being an artist and having to demonstrate integrity through the creation of some piece of art seems like a very pretentious thing to do, because it's like you are special and you have this thing that others need to have access to.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that integrity is more of a, maybe if I understand correctly, an introspective journey where you touch on something that is part of the human condition to which others might be able to relate.
Which actually makes it extroverted in its own right also. It's a really strange balance between the two things, but basically what it means to me is, if I tell a story and I don't spell it out word by word, but I tell you a situation, put it into words. Let's use lyrics as an example, and I'll write out some lyrics which are just the amount of abstract enough for you to be able to not exactly know what I'm talking about, but just specific enough through my own experiences that you'll be able to relate to them. Then that to me is integrity. Because I'm not just pulling it out of a hat. I'm not saying it's impossible to do, but I do believe that it's very difficult to take an idea out of nothingness and then make that something that you will be able to feel with the same amount of strength.
So you're saying that standing on the shoulders of giants is paradoxically a requirement of integrity, because you would think that integrity is uniqueness.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable for anybody who's creative that, of course, you're going to stand on.
But you're saying that it's common heritage in a way. No?
What do you mean by that?
That you build on like the, how to say that you build on a,
You mean externally
body
through
of
other
pre-existing-
artists?
on a body of pre-existing art, and also just life experience in general.
Yeah, well, that's two different things. Because one thing is you're inevitably going to build a product, or anything you do will be a direct result of whatever you have indulged in. So if you listen to a lot of Metallica all your life, when you pick up a guitar, chances are it's gonna sound a lot like Metallica. It's just a black and white example. But at the same time, if you're talking about internal values, there you have a choice all of a sudden. I think your influences are going to be more on a subconscious level, where your choice of storytelling, your choice of your direct projection of your art is more on a conscious level. Because here you can decide, what am I going to tell you a story about, right? And I've tried both, and that's why I feel that way. Fuel for the Revolution, our first album, were great songs. I will stand by them. I really like the songs. I like the product. I like the album. But at no point did I ever sit down and think, I'm going to try and tell this story. See what I mean? I did make a conscious decision to actually pull out some of my specific experiences and then translate that into a product. Whatever did come out came out on a subconscious level.
Yeah, you let it come together by itself.
By itself.
Yeah, otherwise, I mean, it might be a self-defeating process to try to really be a control freak and try to piece it together exactly the way that you saw it.
Although that's exactly what I did in Nowhereland.
Oh yeah?
The next one, I actually sat down and I said, all right, we have this this concept where each song on the album will then represent a chapter in the book Nowhereland, which will come out hopefully at some point soon when I finish it. We're playing the concert, as you know, you've been playing bass for us.
Yeah.
Which is really awesome. But we do it live, where we have shorter versions of the chapters, and then we tell the chapter, and then we play the song, and we have the drawings and the illustrations from the book, which we then have on a projector. So, but the whole idea with the book was to sit down and say, okay, I have a story I want to tell, and this story is a pirate story, right? Now, obviously, I don't have experience as a pirate. I've never met a pirate. It's a different era. These are things that I have no knowledge about or no emotional association to, right? But this is the story I wanted to tell. So, what do? I took my own experiences and I said, all right, so I need a protagonist. What does he represent? Well, he has certain values. I took that out of my own life experiences, right? I had a stepfather who used to beat the crap out of me when I was a kid. All right, well, that'll be the big bad guy. And he's represented indirectly in the story. All right, so I've been to Iraq. Okay, so we have a song called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia being the land between two rivers, which is where Iraq is, and that is basically where that story takes place. Everything is reflected directly or indirectly through my own life experiences.
Is the first album as personal as Nowhereland?
Not even close.
Yes, because it seems to me like Nowhereland is very, very inspired by your life experience and what we were talking about. And the more I learn about you, and the more I learn about the songs and the lyrics and so on, the more I can connect the dots.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point. And that's what I mean with integrity.
And the two albums are so different.
Yeah. And
it's funny because I feel like the first album is more diverse in terms of style and stylistic range.
Yeah.
Whereas the second album is more unified stylistically.
Yeah.
But this, it's more concentrated in terms of storytelling as well.
Exactly, and this was an exercise.
It's one big song.
Exactly, and it was an exercise in that as well, and it was an exercise in what integrity meant to me, and the hope was that when I was able to tell a story through my own life experiences, but not spell it out specifically, that people would be able to relate to it and understand the emotion and the intent behind the story and the songs. Without,
do you feel like?
No, I was just going to say without specifically knowing what I'm trying to tell them. So being able to draw your own experiences into that.
Do you feel like the fact that you've recorded the first album with a producer in a big studio, and that you recorded the second album by yourself in a home studio, did that have any influence or impact on the creative process and the fact that they are so different?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll say the freedom of being in your own studio and having the time to work. I'm a bit of a hermit when I work. When I start a project, I'm stubborn as hell. I have no self-control, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. And in this case with Nowhereland, I locked myself into the practice room and turned on the blue lights, and I had the sound of waves and ships and pirate ships and stuff in the background all the time for weeks and weeks on end.
So you went from, no pun intended, total immersion.
You could say that. It was a combination of many things. One thing was that I really wanted to throw myself into this universe, and I was living in this universe for all intents and purposes, with the sounds and the lighting, and I was spending every moment I could in the practice room trying to imagine this universe, at the same time trying to project my own experiences into that, for whatever that meant. But another aspect of it was that I had just gone through hell by losing my voice. I got an infection. I think nobody really knows, but I went through a process where I got vocal cord paralysis. So I actually lost the use of my left vocal cord. I think it was functioning at like 20%, 20%, which meant that I couldn't sing in practice. That meant that I couldn't sing for more than 15 minutes maybe per day. So a lot of the time I spent in there was basically in imagining the story and trying to figure out where to go with it, and then using the precious 10 or 15 minutes I had to sing that line or that that put that point into the song.
That must have been a very, very different thing.
A completely different process.
It's really interesting how all these contingencies just come to shape.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
not sure I would have been able
in a
to.
vacuum. Yeah.
I don't think I could have been. I would have been able to make a product like Nowhereland if I could just sing the whole damn thing in one go, because every sentence every phrase on that album has maximum meaning and impact, because I had no choice. That I spent days and days thinking of just that one line that I was going to deliver and what that meant and what does that reflect and how does that connect to the story, but how does it not really spell it out anyway. And this is why a song like The Island, for example, that I've been told again and again that people relate to it as if it was, some people think it's a love song. Some people think it's a breakup song. And when they hear it that way, they hear it exactly like that. And then when I tell the story of Nowhereland, whenever we play gigs, they're like, "Oh, that's what it," So it can mean so many.
For me, it evokes the Treasure Island.
There you go. See, it
and also it sounds. That's how it sounds to me. It sounds like I'm in a bark. Can you say that? Is that a word in English? A
Like a
tiny
boat?
Yeah,
boat,
do you know
yeah.
about a tiny one?
Yeah.
The one that you use to leave the the mother boat, the fleet, to go on the island and actually inspect it. And
It would be called in this case, it would be a
small
longboat. A longboat is what they would use,
longboat. Yeah, a small embarkation or.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it feels, because there is this. And yeah, I mean, I play the bass line and I really like it, and it sounds almost tropical to me.
Yeah, and that was the idea, and everything put in there was consciously put in there. Nothing on that album is by chance, and that is a whole different process than the first album. And now with the third album, I'm kind of
Renaissance series.
The Renaissance series, yeah, which is basically a similar project where we're kind of trying to recreate that level of integrity. In a way, by putting it into a story, which is going to be a movie, a stop motion movie. And again, each song represents, not even represents, each song is a chapter. That's the difference. Where in Nowhere Land, each song represents a chapter. Here, it is almost like a silent movie, and each song is just, we have 5 songs on it. So it's intended as a series of 5 stories, which then make one long story.
But are the lyrics connected the way they are on Nowhere Land?
Yes and no. A lot of these songs are older songs. Some are not. And the ones we went in and didn't, basically we sat down and analyzed. Okay, what does this song mean? What is that? Because a lot of what happens when I write stuff.
So it's more of a retro-engineering process of drawing a common thread.
Yes. And then putting the parts together, and whatever doesn't have the mortar between the bricks, we then created the mortar. Meaning that we wrote new songs and reformed songs and rewrote songs in order to make the storyline fit. Because
so it sounds like a composite approach to me.
It is, but a lot of the stuff that was written already had a common thread in regards of that what I wrote had a purpose on a subconscious level. So basically, it was digging out what was that subconscious. So where Fuel for the Revolution was just a collection of songs, which were written subconsciously, but then not put together to a conscious level.
They were written individually without a sight of the greater whole, is what you mean.
Exactly. And they were put together because they just sounded good together, and we made a good product and this and that. But there was no real, like, okay, that's what this means and that's what that means. And then Nowhere Land came along, and then we flipped that coin, and we consciously, before the songs we created, said, all right, let's put this thing together. Let's see what we're going to do. And we told the story, and everything was put together. Now, it's a new process. Again, it's always about rediscovering your process and trying to figure out new ways to do things. We took the subconsciously written songs and try to figure out, almost like a psychoanalysis of the songs, figure out, okay, what does this mean? And what does it represent? And how does it fit in the story? And what's missing? And then put the thing together.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's really exciting because it's like self-discovery. It's like, that's what that meant, right? And you're really trying to dig into what was it I was trying to say. And often we don't know that. It's like your subconscious is trying to tell you something, and then you're finally putting it into a concrete product.
Yeah.
Which we hope to project through the film. I think it's really strong. I think it's going to be one of the strongest products so far.
I mean, my favorite album so far of the two is Nowhere Land, but it maybe has to do with the way I consume music, because I'm a musician myself, and I'm a bit nerdy about it, and I just love this process of finding evidence and be like, oh, this means that, and that song is connected to that song, and etc.
Yeah.
And also you have leitmotifs that are, it's definitely not obvious, but if you listen to it a bunch of times, you can hear them, that come back from song to song, etc.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know if it's possible. It's definitely possible to write a compelling piece of art and of music by writing on a song per song basis, but still, and that's just a personal opinion, there is something that is to be gained from trying to build something that makes sense on a greater scale.
I think it all comes down to your definition of what music represents for you, or what art represents for you in general. And I think that definition is different from creator to creator.
And and depends also when you live, because the fact that a song should be between 3 and 5 minutes on the radio is completely absurd.
Well, the concept of an album is absurd.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's a constraint. It's not absurd. It comes from a very material reality of like the number of like.
It's absurd in a modern context because it's not necessary, but just because it's absurd doesn't make it irrelevant.
Yeah, well, that's just like the way it is.
Exactly.
But yeah, like you can have 4 or 5 hour long Wagnerian operas, and you can have like a pop song that is less than 2 minutes.
And if we go back to saying that music is a form of communication, well, then you could say that a lot of the words that we have in our spoken language are also absurd. I mean, we've had separate conversations where we had some words were like, why does this word like this, or why is this word like that? Oh, well, this word is derived from this meaning and that meaning. I think you had a description of a French word where we spoke about...
Yeah, I guess the question would be more, how would it make sense? Because there is no way for it to make sense anyways.
Yeah.
So we just have to settle something. There is no right answer to the question, how long should the average piece of music be?
No, but my point is, what was the example you gave me? We had a conversation the other day where we were talking about language, and you said there was a word in French which was derived from something which was then misunderstood.
Oh yeah, poids.
Okay,
weight.
So explain that.
Yeah, well. Okay, well, that's going to take 2 minutes to explain that.
Go ahead,
but
because I want to use it for my point.
Yeah, okay. Basically, according to what I've read, the big difference from between French and Italian, that are both Latin languages, like overwhelmingly Latin in heritage, Latin and Greek. The difference is that the Italians took a phonetic route to write their words. So, and the French took an etymological route. So, for example, philosophy, which is philosophy, is written with PH.
Right.
Because because that's how it is written in Greek. You know, it's like a direct reference to the Greek roots.
Yeah.
But in Italian and in Spanish as well, I think it's written with an F, filosofia. And but then of course this like this process of finding the etymology of every word sometimes went wrong, and a good example of that is the word poids, which means weight, and it's written P-O-I-D-S. You know, French words, like
right?
They have too many letters.
Exactly.
And they added a D because they thought that it came from the Latin pondus, which means weight, but actually it didn't. They were wrong, and the root was a Celtic word. So they just added a D there for no reason. I mean, like there was a reason, but they made a mistake there, and it's not the only occurrence.
Well, what I'll use as an example is I want to draw a parallel between your story that you just told and the concept of having to have 3.5 minutes for a song or an album, which is equally absurd, but yet has become part of our language. So if you want somebody to understand the word in French, you want to spell it correctly, even though the premise of the spelling of that word is completely wrong.
Because I mean, if you spell it in another way, it could mean P.
Exactly. But the listener of that word will have to have the correct spelling, regardless of whether it was absurd or not to spell it that way. The same thing with music. If music is a form of communication and you want to put something together with a verse and a chorus or whatever, a certain musical structure, you want the listener to understand what you're trying to tell them, right?
It's digestible.
And then you can say, oh, well, no, because it's on the wrong premise, or you want to change it, or why should we have to do things? Okay, fair enough. You can spell your words however you want, but if you want people to understand your sentence, you're going to have to spell them correctly, or they're going to understand the word P.
Yeah, or also tar.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's French.
But you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, not tar, but pitch. You know that, like...
Right, yeah.
But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. That makes sense. And
that as communicators,
you have to
use a language.
Package it in a way that the people, okay, so now we're talking about linguistics, but you know how there is like a signified and a signifier.
Mm-hmm.
So I have meaning up there in my brain,
Right.
and I encode this meaning into words. And the reason I choose that word or this word is because I trust in your ability to take that word, which is in itself, it's a signifier in itself, it's meaningless, but I know that you have the quote unquote software or wetware to decode it and extract the meaning from it. So yeah, that's kind of what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important.
So that's why we need a song. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter. We have a song, and people know that in a song there is a verse and a chorus.
Yeah.
So we create songs in that format because we know that people can readily extract meaning from it.
If you are a songwriter or a musician who subscribes to music as a form of communication, then your basis of how you put together music is with the intent of having a listener understand your message, emotional or musical, either way, or lyrically. Your intent changes if you see music as something different. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
But for me, like I said, I am a communicator because for me, it's not about the music. It's not about the progression. It's not about this. It's not about that, not the details. It's about communicating.
Yeah.
It's just
about
like
your target audience as well.
It's like a language.
Yeah.
And then you can draw the exact same parallels. You say, well, why do we do this in a language but not in music? Or the other way around. And the answer is that, well, it's because for some musicians and for some songwriters, it's not necessary to have a listener, maybe. Maybe it's not about communication for some writers.
Or it's about communicating with other artists also. And that happens a lot. Like, for example, if you play the lick, that's like a musician insider joke.
Right.
So right there, you're communicating with other musicians. Bach, when he writes, you know, sometimes he wrote some like theme or whatever, a fugue, and he would write his name with notes, B-A-C-H, because in the German notation you have an H. So he would write his name, but like if you hear it, except if you are like you have like the absolute, you have perfect pitch and you just can pick it up,
right,
you won't notice that. So it's kind of a joke that was, or that is like some communication that was intended for someone who would read the partition.
Yeah.
And so on. So I think it depends who you want to target.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of the guy who would be
or
perfectly...
in jazz when you play a lick. I mean, you play, you know, it's like, oh, he played that. That's like, that reminds me.
And that's
this
one way of
that.
playing music, and another way is I'm thinking of the guy who's perfectly content sitting in the basement playing for himself with his little guitar and just playing, because it's not about playing for other people. It's about just playing, because for themselves, and that's perfectly fine. It's just not what I do, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate. Is basically that. Although there's no right and wrong, for me, music is about communication and is a perfect parallel. Not even music, but art and drawing, storytelling, anything you can, movies, whatever.
Creative endeavor.
Any creative endeavor to me is a form of communication, which is completely parallel to language.
Well, I mean...
is that extreme?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It reminds me of the guy who composed West Side Story.
Oh gosh.
I forgot his name. Leonard, is that his name?
Beep.
Anyways, and he gave a super famous music lecture. One of the Norton lectures. I'll remember his name.
Okay.
And basically, he applied Chomskyan linguistics to music. And he was just talking, so he was drawing pretty advanced parallels between music and language.
Okay.
And it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Leonard Bernstein.
Okay.
Bernstein. Bernstein. I don't know how you say.
Bernstein,
Yeah.
probably.
And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it really blew my mind.
Yeah.
I have to watch it again.
Mm.
And there was this idea that I remember is the dead duck idea.
Which
That's-
is?
that's how he called it, because in music you can like, in English, if you want to say like a dead duck,
Mhm.
you have to use two words, dead duck.
Okay.
But in music, you can link it together, so you could say dead duck.
Okay.
Like for example, if you have a melody that ends in a D,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the next melody that starts with a D, you can use only one D, and and have a D in there. That is, if I want to do a very specious scientific comparison, that is in a quantum state, because because it means something in the context of the previous melody,
Yeah.
and it also means something recontextualized in the context of the following melody.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's just that's just one of the things.
Sounds pretty advanced.
Yeah, he talked about, but that would be a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was talking about the, I mean, a lot of the parallels,
Mm.
and one of them that is so interesting to me is the pentatonic scale, because every kid rhyme like na 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 is a pentatonic scale in every language.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, you know,
Yeah.
that just something that I wanted to pick your brain about.
Hold on. Hold that thought. Go for it.
We've been talking about creativity,
Mhm.
and I've I think heard about this idea recently that I thought was interesting, that creativity in some ways is the opposite of learning, because in some way,
Mhm.
because when you learn, you are you are teaching yourself to follow an array of steps and to follow a certain protocol.
Mhm.
And in many ways, creativity tends to be this like divergent thinking operation or
Mhm.
exercise in which you try to explore new paths. And that's something we really struggle, I mean, some of us, at least me for sure, as musicians, is to do something that is both that is palatable and that means something, but at the same time is new.
Mhm.
And it's really hard. There is no process, there is no recipe for creating something new. And I was wondering what you would think about this
Well,
paradox or conflict.
I'm not sure I agree with the idea that creativity is not, or is the opposite of learning. Because I think it is learning in a way. What you're doing with creativity is you're taking the blocks of the things which you have accumulated throughout your life, and you're repurposing them in a new and unique way, which has not been done before.
Yeah, it depends on how you define creativity, but it's very interesting to hear that you would see it this way, as some kind of a transformative process.
It is. To me, it definitely is, because so you learn how to build a wall. Let's just use that as an example, right? So you have the knowledge to put the bricks into place and put the mortar in between the bricks. And now what are you going to do with that? Are you just going to build a wall, or are you going to think, okay, what can I do with this knowledge? Oh, I know. Let's build an aqueduct, And now we're combining the knowledge of, maybe you accumulated knowledge of in the water infrastructure of a city, or the needs or whatever. Maybe you have I don't know, like a concept of how society is put together or whatever, and you combine that with the physical knowledge of how to build a wall, and voila, you're able to build an aqueduct, right? That's creativity. And maybe in this case, it's not, because aqueducts have been built and millions of people have done it before us. But in this case...
Do you mean the first aqueduct?
The first aqueduct, for example, yeah. When that was brought into
so yeah, that is cross-pollination right there.
That's cross-pollination. It's parallel thinking. And parallel thinking and cross-pollination is basically forms of creativity. Now, what is your definition of creativity?
I mean, it's an open question, and it's a question that has been asked, and I don't think we're gonna find an answer, because, I mean, there is countless debates. One of a famous one is a French one, the writer Proust against another critique, literary critique called Sainte-Beuve, and he this book Contre Sainte-Beuve, so against him, was published after his death. Postmortem book, posthumous, where and one Sainte-Beuve, I think, was taking he was saying you can only appreciate art or something creative through the lens of the life of its author,
right?
And the other one was saying those two things are not necessarily related and should be appreciated separately. And then you have this idea, like, and if you go way back, there is the Newton quote, super famous, that everybody is standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
Which is a quote that he took from Bernard de Chartres, and God knows who in like the 11th century or 12th century, and God knows where he's got it. So it's really interesting, you know. And there is this antique idea, maybe Platonic, that creativity is you channeling the gods.
Yeah. So we're into.
So it's a debate, you know.
Exactly.
Where does it come from?
Exactly. And I have always found the concept of trying to pick out an idea from something which is buried so deep within you that it seems like it comes from outside, as something fascinating that is really unique when being creative. Because you have certain blocks which life gives you, certain things which are laid out on a conscious level. You're able to, I don't know, you're able to bind a book or tie your shoelaces or whatever, things. And then there are other things which you have accumulated throughout your life on a subconscious level, which you may not even be aware that you are able to pull out and put into a creative process. And you can use both. And the more you know yourself and the more you are able to explore that, the more you're able to learn about yourself. And this is why I disagree with the fact that creativity is the antithesis of learning, because in essence it is basically learning about what you have accumulated on a subconscious level, and then are able to pull out. Who was it? Michelangelo.
Yes.
Right. What he said about the stone.
Yeah.
Right.
That he was seeing the sculpture in the marble, and that he just had to take the marble from out.
Exactly.
Yeah, he just had to liberate the statue.
Liberate the statue from the stone.
Yeah.
The statue was already there.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of a myth.
It's not, though.
We know that he had like tons of unfinished and failed projects because
course.
he's a human.
Yeah, of course. And you could argue that maybe his humanity got in the way of the divinity of that. It's possible.
But it's the approach that he took.
It's the approach, and it's also definitely the approach that I do also. I try to switch off on a conscious level and just allow myself.
Hence your dislike for music theory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I try to.
I've noticed. But actually, I've learned a lot from your approach.
I try to switch it off because I believe that. I pretend that the music is already there in the air, and I pretend that it's like radio waves, and I'm just the radio.
Graham Hancock.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, but with aliens and DMT.
Oh, okay. No.
Anyways, yeah.
Well, I mean, I've always said
but it's a good heuristic. Like it's a way of thinking about it. Whether the reality doesn't matter, it's the way you think about it.
Yeah, and I'm not a religious person, but I've always said, almost jokingly, that I didn't write the songs. God did. You know, I was just a receiver. and I just kind of translated it. It was already in the air. And when I started joking around with that idea, like I always just tell people that, yeah, I didn't write that, almost like in a humbling kind of way. It's like, oh, that's a really nice song. It's like, yeah, well, I didn't really write it. You know, it was already there. I just kind of picked it out of the air and translated it. And then I thought about it, and it's like,
out of the ether,
or whatever. Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's a very old idea.
Yeah, and you know what? It kind of works for me, because whenever I do try to come up with something truly unique and creative and novel, I have to switch off, because I feel like the more I am switched on and the more conscious I am about it, the more it becomes something that's already been done, kind of, or something that I have already done, which is even worse. And this is why Nowhere Land, the album that we made with Substereo.
But it's crazy. Sorry, finish your.
I was just going to say, this is why it was such a challenge, because I was trying to incorporate the conscious into a subconscious process and combine those two things. You were going to say?
No, I mean, I'm just reflecting on, just thinking how crazy, how counterintuitive it is. Because with most skills, like, I don't know, learning to play football or practicing guitar, it's like you have to go at it. And it's pretty, I mean, you could argue about that, but for the most part, it's like pretty straightforward what you have to do. But for creativity or creating songs, and it's also the case for me, it's like, it's a case of, it's like the more you try, the least you manage, the more expectations you have, the more they get in the way.
Yeah, they do.
So you could almost liken it to meditation.
It is meditation. And I know it is, because I feel it. I feel that the more I write, the more I indulge in creativity, the more balanced I feel. And I've been asked many times if I do meditate, and I feel like that's exactly what happens, because you concentrate so much and you learn to let go and concentrate so much on one thing that you just kind of like switch off. It's kind of difficult to describe unless you've actually tried it. But you, I don't know, open up to the angels.
But it's like a flow state.
It is a flow state, for sure.
That's also what I experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, reading a good book, or time flies.
Riding a motorcycle, you do the same thing, and this is for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't know about that. I'm always the passenger.
Yeah, no, for me, it's.
But I still, I'm a passenger in Berlin.
That's when you ride a motorcycle, you concentrate so much on not dying, basically, that you manage to switch the world out. And this is why a lot of motorcyclists say they get this feeling of liberation when you do ride. And I get a lot of the same feeling out of music, and I feel like I'm lucky to have all these things when I paint, when I draw. Just like the world just kind of slips away. And it's an amazing feeling, and it really clears the mind.
Yeah.
And this
Same when you ski and stuff.
But when it's like
sports, some of them like somewhat dangerous sports.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of different disciplines have that element to it. But I think what happens is, it is like meditation, because what happens is you have to kind of reach that level, that high, that breakthrough feeling. And when you do break through, it's just everything just switches off. And then that's what I mean with what's probably happening on a physiological level is you're probably digging into your subconscious somehow, and digging old experiences or old conversations which are buried deep, deep, deep inside you, and you don't even know are there, into something which then becomes tangible through your art, your songwriting, your lyrics, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that process feels like it's external. That's what I mean. And that's why I say, well, I didn't write the song.
It's almost like you have to decorporate, because you're in a situation where you're both the judge and the party. So you have to somehow split yourself into the writer and the listener.
Yeah.
And sometimes at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's why I'd say, well, I didn't write that song, the gods did. Well, no, the gods didn't write that song. My subconscious did. But it feels like the gods wrote it. It feels like I'm just liberating the statue from the stone. And that's what I think he meant, Michelangelo.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I wouldn't say the gods, but maybe it's striking and interesting to think that what you write from instinct usually sounds better, and it sounds better 5 years later.
Oh yeah.
Than what you write through effort. And it should be the opposite.
Right.
In my case, it's like I feel that when I'm writing a song, it's like I'm trying to draw a dolphin. That's the metaphor I use. And then my dolphin starts to look like a plane. And if I want to keep on drawing a dolphin, I'm going straight head into the wall.
Yeah.
So then I have to start drawing a plane, and then it starts to look like an island, and then it starts, and so on. And then I end up with something, and I don't know what it is, and that's definitely not what I aimed for, but at least I like it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
and also we were talking about how like your circumstances have a big influence on the output that you have. Like, for example, if you write a song on your guitar player and not there in the rehearsal space that day, like the other day, you're gonna write something totally different.
Yeah,
that would never have been written otherwise.
Exactly, and that's why you have to really rely on your instinct. But then really becomes interesting is when you try to incorporate the conscious on top of the subconscious and combine those two things, and draw from both those things. Because if it becomes too conscious, then it becomes too obvious, and it becomes too obvious, it becomes too predictable and counterintuitive to the ultimate goal, which is integrity, in my book. And that was exactly what we tried with Nowhere Land. Is okay, we're going to try and do a conscious direction on this story, but at the same time draw from the subconscious feeling, so it doesn't feel like we wrote it, or like I wrote it, or whatever, the lyric or the guitar part or this and that, but so that it feels like it came from somewhere else, but it is directly correlated to the story I'm trying to tell. This is one of the hardest things I've ever done, is trying to sit down and write that, and write a story. Say, okay, now this is what I want to tell. Then this happened, and then that happened, and then like really make it more tangible than abstract. And everything I've always written, because of my approach of letting the gods write it or whatever, letting the angels sing through the air into my mind.
You have to materialize.
Exactly.
It turn. I mean, it's a process of, you could say, giving birth or transmuting. I mean, if I wanted to sound fancy, I would say an alchemical process almost, where you turn something like a thought, which is not a material thing, into something tangible.
Yeah,
that you can listen to.
But it can, if you don't grab onto it with your own consciousness, it becomes abstract and unrelatable.
Yeah, there has to be an extractable meaning from
exactly. And that's the real balance within it. And what I'm describing is applicable to the way I write. It's not universal by any means. This is just a description of how I approach it. And
yeah, of course, that's what I'm asking you
about.
And
the meaning that I derive from that process, it might be completely different for somebody else.
Yeah. How do you know in general that you've written a good song? Is it only a personal feeling, or is there an outside confirmation, something that can confirm to you?
I don't know that I have written a good song.
Yeah, okay, well, that answers the question.
Yeah.
But the reason I was asking this is because if we think of ourselves as builders of memes, so self-replicating ideas, how do we know if our idea gets successful or famous, however you define it, because it's actually a good idea, or because it's more like a virus and it just spreads? Because you can say that there's a difference between the capacity of something to spread and the fact that it's good.
There is absolutely zero correlation between quality and success.
Yeah, and you can see it. So that was kind of a loaded question right there.
It has nothing to do with each other.
That's also what I think.
Yes. You can be the most creative, incredible artist or creative person in the world and have created something that the world has never seen before. Chances are nobody gives a crap. Because you have to have marketing behind you. You have to have all of the logical process, the non-artistic process behind you to kind of propel that in a... You can be lucky if somebody like picks it up or so, but still, if you do that, like, and you can even be so lucky that you're born into a body that's able to do both. But usually what happens is either you're one or the other. And you need a team. This is why it's so important to have somebody who understands the process, who's able to take your art and then turn it into something and sell it. A salesman, a salesperson. In essence,
that's very interesting.
Because
I think you have to keep track of where you are, but more importantly, when you are, because many artists, because we are living our lives right now. Of course, it's tautology. It's obvious. Many artists that were known and famous back in their day are now completely forgotten. And you have artists like Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, or Paul Gauguin, or many artists.
I believe he wanted to be called Monsieur Vincent, please.
Vincent van Gogh, we would say.
He insisted on Monsieur Vincent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But this guy was broke. And he was just another madman during his lifetime, and now he's one of the most revered painters of all times.
Yeah.
But we don't want. I mean, I don't know. I'm speaking for myself. I'd rather not be a cursed poet like that and lead a life of desperation only for people to discover.
I think we all, even people of success. I think most of us lead the life of disparity.
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh, that's also something I wanted to touch on. But I would like to have, I mean, of course, it's a dream, but some kind of a statistical analysis of whether it's like correlated or uncorrelated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are they? Who was an artist that? I mean, many of them were super popular during their heyday, and then still remain this way. And there you could even argue that there is survivorship bias, because like if Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci were not famous in their heyday, they would not have been able to produce the output if they did not have such famous patrons.
Of course, yeah.
So I guess we might never know the answer to that question, but that's kind of a scary question for an artist to...
It is, and it's something you kind of have to realize that your talent has absolutely nothing to do with the success that you're going to get, and you just kind of have to be really resilient and know how to do it and deal with it yourself, or find somebody who can do it for you.
Yeah.
And most never find the resources to find somebody or to pay for somebody who's able to do it for them. I'm talking about a promotion agency or...
Yeah, we were talking about it recently, but it's a bit of a catch-22. It's like the more successful you are, the more successful you are.
Yeah.
And you have to be successful to be successful.
Yeah.
Because if you're not famous, you have to... Like there is a sleight of hand that happens when you jump from one category to the other, and then from there you've hit critical mass, and then everything works. But
it's a recipe for insanity, because if you're a creative person and if you consider yourself a communicator, right, and now you don't have the ability or the resources to find anybody to listen, then you're in essence just making music, or like you said, reading poems to a wall throughout your life, and it's just a matter of time before you lose your marbles.
Yeah, that's a very sad looking image.
But that's what happens. You might be the best poet in the world. You're reading your poems to a wall. Nobody's going to listen. Nobody gives a crap until somebody, helps you with it.
Yeah.
And if you don't get somebody to help you with it, either you do help yourself, which very few people can do.
That is a sad truth.
Or you go crazy. You go mad.
Yeah.
I think this is why a lot of artists end up really frustrated.
There is a lot of things I feel like we don't talk about, and they have to do with our bias our anthropic bias and who we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the survivorship bias, when we see quote unquote, I don't like this term, but successful people, and we try to retro-engineer what they did to get there, but we just assume that they did something and that it came from the inside. But what if it's just a situation? Because I don't know if he had a nice life, but like Rilke, for example, the Swiss poet, like in the 21st century, good luck writing those poems and getting famous, because some people write poems, but it's like it's not a dominant art form as it used to be anymore. And when poets used to be, I don't know, I'm talking about Mary Shelley and her and Ozymandias by Percy by Shelley and stuff. Those guys were the superstars. I mean, not really, because you cannot even, even there. But yeah, anyways. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of lost what I was saying there. But yeah, you just cannot know. So many things you cannot know.
Yeah.
And we have a tendency to romanticize our lives because there is just no other way. You're bound to think about your life.
Yeah.
And there are some things that maybe should be left alone without being thought about too much.
Yeah.
But by thinking about them, you are stamping your bias on them.
Well, that and it. The strange thing about creativity and art is it begs the question of it brings about an existential crisis, in essence, is what it does, because you end up asking yourself, why? Why do you create? Why do you do what you do? Who's it for? Okay, so we said I'm a communicator. Fine. So I communicate for whom? Well, okay, I communicate for the audience, the listeners. Okay, great. So let's say I build up an audience, somebody who will listen, somebody who will appreciate the art. Michelangelo creates David, right? So he has an audience automatically. People say, wow, what a statue, incredible. So he can tell himself, okay, I spent the energy that I created this, maybe in part for myself, for my bettering my own person, which can have its own different reasons. But in essence, I did this for humanity. I did this for other people, to bring joy to other people. Okay, great. That's maybe not. Maybe he had a different idea of it, but this could be one argument, right? So you're doing it for other people. You're doing it because you want to not only have an audience, but you want to have a recipient who will appreciate and thereby bring joy to their existence. Great. How long would they exist? Okay. All right. 50 years? Okay, no, let's be positive. Let's say 1,000 years. Let's say 1,000 years. Your art will persevere for 1,000 years. And I don't know how many generations you would have in 1,000 years, but what, 12? 14 generations? All right, let's say 14 generations. Your art will be appreciated. Your art will be remembered. This is extreme, because how many generations are going to remember John Lennon?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's be super extreme. Let's say, John Lennon will be remembered for 20 generations. All right, what happens at 21?
Yeah.
Gone. It's like he never existed.
Yeah.
And then what did he do it for? And then when you think about humanity, how short has humanity, how much
I mean, you could argue that vicariously, in some way, his influence still somehow is there.
Not if humanity disappears, which it will, because it's only been here for a short while.
Yeah, it's bound to disappear.
So what if there was, just hypothetically,
you said makes me think of
Graham Hancock said there might be a different society that used to exist on Earth, whatever, believe it or not.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Graham Hancock.
Well, whether you are or not, the idea is, if there was, even if it's just science fiction, if there ever was a different society that we don't know of, well, maybe they had their John Lennon, and what affected, or maybe they had their Da Vinci or whatever, gone, forgotten. So what did they do it for? So what was the art there for in the first place? So it really ends up being like art becomes this amplifier of your existential question.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think about, but it makes you feel, the more art you make, the more you think about why you're making it. And the more you think about why you're making it, the more you realize how insignificant it actually is.
It's funny because I mentioned Shelley and Ozymandias. I don't know if you know that poem.
No.
Ozymandias is another, I think it's the Greek name for Ramses II.
Oh,
and it's a very short, it's his most famous poem, and it's a very short story. It's just like travelers that find in the middle of a desert a broken statue with a pedestal with something written on it along the lines of you mortal beholding my kingdom despair, because I have such a mighty kingdom. And the last line of the poem is that I forgot, the sands lone and level extended to the horizon or something like that. And it's just like, that is the only thing that is left from a great empire.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about.
And it's still there. But what about all the things that we never got?
Well, how do you kill a society? How do you kill a culture? What happened to Carthage?
I think it's Carthago delenda est.
The first thing they did, they made sure that anything that they ever created of art and stories or anything got extinguished, because if you don't have your art, you have nothing.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing they went. That's the lifeblood of society.
The Romans went to destroy Carthage at any cost.
And that's the first thing that they went for. It's the
art. Yeah.
The art. So.
And that's also what the Nazis did.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a certain value to it, and you have to think about, well, what is that value if it doesn't last? So if your art only lasts one generation or half a generation, is it really worth it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We would have to question the worth, the idea of worth.
But that's a constant question that I ask myself. And then, is there a way to make it last?
You're just like claiming, you're just going too far up the causal chain.
I think
for your own good.
I think I am. But it's kind of
because
scary.
they are also like, you could also have the converse, make a converse point in some ways.
Okay.
For example, Beowulf?
Yeah.
Beowulf is arguably the first work in the English language. Even though, don't try to read it, it's unreadable, it's Saxon, it's impossible. It looks like, to me it looks like Icelandic, but I wouldn't know, right? I studied it a little bit in America. And Beowulf was found in one single half-burnt codex called the Noel Codex. And that's something we almost never had. It was the only exemplar of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, people knew about it, but it was just another old thing.
Yeah.
Until this guy came around called Tolkien. And he just started the whole heroic fantasy thing. He's also a world builder. Like mythopoeia, he created like worlds and languages and geography. And more important than that, he created a movement. And today, how would the Western world look like without, and arguably, I don't know it well enough, but the world in general, without Lords of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, trolls, and sorcerers and dragons? It would be a very different world. What would we talk about?
Yeah.
What would be on Netflix or whatever?
You think Beowulf had that same impact during its time?
I mean, I think...
Do you think the Epic of Gilgamesh had its...
for sure.
It's that
and
same
I
impact?
can guarantee that they were not thinking about that. Because it was almost lost. Like the One Ring. It was almost lost and then found again, and it had an effect, like unmeasurable effect. So I'm just trying to inject a little bit of happiness in that talk.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always hope. I mean, even if you do create something that's not like Van Gogh, that's not appreciated during your time maybe will be appreciated at a later point, or maybe somebody will dig it up from the ruins of your society, and then maybe Beowulf was just the story of some lone, I don't know, like someone like you or me who wasn't ultra famous and appreciated through his time, and then it was dug up, and then it just became this thing.
Yeah.
Many years later, possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to kill the mood again, also could talk about what good is art in the age of information, because it's there, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's the irony of time capsules as well.
Yep.
You know, like school kids just putting stuff in time capsules so people can find it 1,000 years later and put
Yeah.
it in museums. The thing is, like, when we started doing that, we did not need time capsules anymore, because people didn't think about it. And
well, this is what's so scary about art in the era of information, is that we're putting our art into ones and zeros, because anything tangible of what music actually is just disappearing into a system that is inevitably going to disappear, die.
one and zeros to me seems to be a much more secure way of storing.
You think so?
Of course, yeah.
You think in 2,000 years, if they find an old server or something, that they'll try to dig up our Spotify songs? Or would it, like, what if...
Yeah, I mean, I think it can survive 1,000,000 years.
Yeah.
But you cannot find a painting that survives 2,000 years. You can. There is a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But it's because they were like the Dead Sea manuscripts. We only found them because they were in such a unique situation.
Or you put everything into a time capsule. Or eject it into space.
Yeah, you would have, but it's so much easier to save a painting in the form of one and zeros, in a fungible form.
Yeah, but then you have to have somebody to be able to decipher it.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, but...
I mean, even if you
Yeah, that's
update
right.
to a new iPhone, it might not be compatible with the old... I mean, that's just like...
Yeah, but there's no way of knowing that. I mean, there's no way of knowing that your painting will be... that people that will find it in 10 million years will have eyes to look at it.
Yeah, and do you want them to find it in 10 million years, or is it good enough just to have it for 1 or 2 generations? So it begs the question, is it better to have a physical form of art, or is it safe enough to pour it into this information network and just hope that it kind of survives through there?
To turn it into information.
Or is everything that we're turning into information now, everything we're putting into the internet and just leaving it, a lot of the art that's created now only exists in digital form?
But so you think the problem with it is that it's somehow like easy to destroy? Because I was thinking actually the exact opposite thing, and easy to lose. I mean, in some way I see your point, but I guess what I was referring to is more the fact that humans' attention span is not infinite, and that now, you know, it's like the 1984 versus Brave New World situation. Because in 1984, I mean, it's like censorship is bad and it's scary, but the Brave New World situation is way scarier in my opinion.
Right.
Because it's like and it's the situation wherein the one bit of interesting information is drowned, instead of being censored, which by way of the Streisand effect is like, you know, even more, is drowned in a sea of irrelevant information. It's a needle in a haystack to the power of a million. And to me, that is much scarier. Your stuff will be your stuff can be lost, but paradoxically enough, it will maybe never be as lost as it is in a database.
Yeah. Well, the whole point and the whole idea behind this is, where does the importance of your art actually exist? And I always when I try to understand things, which I find difficult to absorb, I put everything into extremes just to kind of put it into perspective, right? So in this case, I would take a painting or music or whatever, and even a conversation or anything you create, and say, all right, it's important in this moment because I created it for a split second. In its creation, that's when it has its
value.
Its value, yeah. Or does it have its maximum value when it has reached 10,000 years of existence and a certain amount of generations, and how many eyes and ears have actually been in contact with it? Now, what happens if you, within 1 week, have more eyes and ears on your product than you could throughout 10,000 years of existence? Because there are more people right now on the internet than ever would be able to see your product, even if it survived 1 million years. You'd have the same amount of people. It's just in a different direction, you know? Instead of through linear time, you're going right now, but it's within your moment. But it's the same amount of ears. Is it equally as important? Does it even need to be observed to have value? In which case, why are we trying to communicate something out? Because if you're communicating something, and if your goal of communication is to have a receiving end, then obviously the maximum output of that would be to have maximum amount of ears and eyes on your product.
I feel like we're forgetting something very important when we see it this way.
Maybe, but I'm just trying to put it into perspective. I'm trying to compare from 0 to maximum, obviously, right? But this is something that I ask myself when you're creating something and you're communicating something out to people. Your goal is to have as many people listen to that as possible. To, let's say, song, right? I want to have as many people listen to it and connect with it as possible. Is it good enough to me to have 10 million people connect with my song in 1 day, or do I want one person each year for 10 million years? Or is it enough with one person? Or is it enough just me by myself, just knowing that it's been created?
I guess that the answer would be to just like think that it's like the pleasure is in the art, the process of making it, and everything else is bonus. Because there is even like one big caveat that I would add to what you just said, and I think it relates. It's interesting that you did not mention it, because I think it has to do with the tyranny of the view.
Okay.
And our technological bias, where we want to measure everything. Because, you know, on YouTube's we have likes and views, and everybody's obsessed by views.
Yeah.
1 million views, 1 billion, 100 views. It's nothing. But then what tells you that every view is the same? It's just a stupid metric, because some people are working and they have, like, if it's a song and they have it in the background.
Yeah.
Some person is transcribing it at the same time, trying to pick up everything. Some person is playing it at their dad's funeral, you know? And how can we even compare that? And before we had like a metric, like for example, there will be no albums that are sold more than Thriller in the history of the world, because we don't sell albums anymore. But is every copy of Thriller the same? Some of them were never opened.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of them were played 1 million times, maybe not, because the CD would have broken up, but a bunch of times. And some of them have been the soundtrack to people's lives in so many different ways we cannot even fathom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, at the end of the day, you know, maybe we should just like have fun.
It's just an
music.
open question. It's just something. I don't think it's something to that should affect the way you create, but it's something that's interesting to ponder.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a more general way, it's just that we're too smart, and that if you start to think about the meaning of it all, you hit whoever you are.
Yeah, maybe.
You hit an existential crisis. Whatever you do.
Which is funny because it brings you back to. I'm sorry.
No.
It brings you back to Buddha. Well,
Buddha cheese.
I'm sorry. Gandhi. Sorry.
Oh, Gandhi.
Did I say Buddha?
Two very admirable people.
Yeah, two quite different. Yeah, but the concept of nothingness.
Yeah, nirvana.
The more you realize about life, about
that's Gandhi?
Isn't that what he? Gandhi. He starved himself.
I mean, Buddha did it too. So
Buddha did it too. Yeah. I guess it's the same idea.
Yeah.
Of trying to reach nothingness. like as if the understanding of nothingness is the ultimate goal. And I feel like the closer you get to pondering the thought of what is art, what is music, what is creativity, where does it all lead? It all leads to nothingness.
Yeah. But
is that depressing?
I don't know. It doesn't tell you what stance to take on it.
Yeah.
But I think, and it's also something I wanted to touch on, because we talked about the fact that many musicians are depressed. And I think that it's not, even though that's what we talked about, but that it's not that the act of creating music is in itself, hard, or it's like, the pains of giving birth, like labor pain, etc., like, in some metaphorical way. But that it's more that whether we like it or not, we are misfits, because the society is not shaped to accommodate for musicians and creatives, not that much. And people that have quote unquote normal jobs, whatever that means, they have an entire system, an entire bunch of institutions, and just the way life is shaped to accommodate and to help them forget about their existential angst.
Yeah.
But we don't. Not as much.
Well, that's what depresses us.
I mean, I'm not depressed, but that was
a lot of artists are very
that's
depressed.
That's what depresses some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be.
Because when you have like a normal job and you have, you have like direct human contact, maybe it's a bit more underground.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're a musician and you just have these moments where you're wondering about these things.
Yeah.
And many people, talking about touching on UBI and that stuff, many people,
universal basic income.
Hope and dream of a society of creatives. And I'm not against the idea. I kind of like it, actually. But I really wonder what that would look like.
I think it would be a success. I think it would. You would see a lot more creativity.
I mean, yeah, for sure.
I mean, I know I would make a lot more if I were on UBI, for sure. I would produce all the time. I would be doing stuff.
Yeah, no, but I mean, not on a personal level, but on a societal level.
Oh, right. Well, that would contribute to the society, I think. If you have 10,000 people doing that, it's the same thing. And other people that otherwise wouldn't even start a creative project would do it if they were on UBI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, we are much more free than we used to be. And there's a divide between, like, quote-unquote creators and consumers. People, that would watch series or play video games, like, in a very stereotypical way. But I think it's kind of bullshit. Because when you see people that watch series like, I don't know, Westworld, and it has repercussions on the series that become more and more complicated. But some people, man, they don't watch series passively. They just soak in every detail. They build theories. They are in groups. They talk about people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there is this extreme metal band, and I found a Facebook group a friend sent to me, and they don't have lyrics, like lyric booklets, and people are just piecing the lyrics together, having different theories and stuff.
Yeah.
And the artists, like, they know about it, but they let them do that.
Of course.
That would be Anal Nathrak, which is an awesome extreme British extreme metal band. But anyways, and same with video games.
Oh, and Rick and Morty and things like that, and Star Wars.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So, yeah, there is a human, like, I think the division between creation and consumption is specious at best.
Yeah.
In many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was a long talk.
Yeah.
We got through. I think it was a good crash test. So.
For sure.
Yeah, maybe I'll have you again. We'll talk again about some other stuff. We could talk for hours.
I'd love to. Yeah.
And yeah, thanks.
Great. All right. Thanks for having me.
So that was episode 1. I hope you enjoyed it, and now it's time for the footnotes. So, at the beginning I said that I was coming from the 21st arrondissement, which is apparently not true, because of course it is not legal denomination or anything, but apparently it turns out that a lot of cities in the Little Crown around Paris call themselves that, so it is not obvious that Boulogne is the 21st arrondissement. Number 2, the flute. I was mentioning that we were talking about that is often played in orchestras is called a Western concert flute in English. So I learned something. Number 3, the number of people on Earth as of April 2019 is 7.7 billion. Number 4, the number of European MPs, or rather, to be clear, members of the European Parliament is 751. So it's even more than I thought I remembered. That's a lot of people. But yeah, there are even more lobbyists. Number 5. Well, I found it surprisingly hard to find statistics about army sizes, and but at any rate, it seems like I was wildly off, because the Royal Air Force is not even in the top 10 of air fleets. So yeah, you'll have to do your own research on that one, because yeah, it is not that simple. Number 6, I wanted to apologize because I said that Germany had a joke of an army, which sounds offensive. That's not the way I meant it. But yeah, so I did not mean to offend anybody. But Chris told me afterwards that talking to people from the German military, that's also how they feel about it. So if anybody has any info about that, any experience, that would be really interesting to hear about. Number 7, I talked shortly about Joko Willink and the Battle of Ramallah, which is wrong. Battle of Ramallah also happened, but the battle that he was talking about is the Battle of Rahmadi. So I stand corrected. Number 8, we were looking for the names of the members of Kiss that collaborated with the producer that worked on Chris's first album, and that would be Ace Frehley, the guitar player, and the drummer. The drummer's name is Peter Criss, also called Catman, because he has the cat makeup. Number 9, I was wrong when I said that the original root of the word poids, so weight in French, Poids, is a Celtic word, because it turns out that it is a Latin word, pensum. And the process that I described is called, in linguistics, is called a false regression. So it's when you ascribe a root to a word that is actually wrong. And yeah, but the description that I made of it was fairly accurate. Number 10, P versus P. So poids can also mean tar, like Poix, but it can also mean P in the sense a little P that you eat, so PEA. In which case it will be written poids, POIS, which is fairly confusing. Which is, I admit, fairly confusing. Okay, 11. So, I mentioned the 1818 poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, which I absolutely love. And yeah, it was published in a journal in conjunction with another poem of the same name by Horace Smith, which I recommend reading as well. It's really nice. And just because I can, and just because I love it, I'm going to read it for you now. And try to be worthy of it. So, Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that his sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So yeah, here it is. Quite the exercise for me. And last note, number 12. I just wanted to correct something that I said about Beowulf, because Beowulf was not written in Saxon, but was written in Old English. And that was the last footnote. Episode is over. Give me a sub if you learned something. This has been Baptiste Vattiès for the Cross Pollination Podcast, and that is all for now.